The Demon King suffered a major setback decades later. He was defeated in a duel against brave knights and magicians. Despite the Great King's strength, such serious attacks from the knights caused him considerable damage, after which he fell to the ground. In his clouded consciousness, barely opening his eyes, he heard those who had overthrown him discussing how they would deal with him. But before that, the knight wanted to list all his crimes. After all, Zick Moore took the lives of hundreds of Grail Knights of the Carvidman Order, caused innocent victims, and much more. Therefore, the knight was going to punish him for so many crimes. Zeke. Moore was glad that he at least kept the key that distorted fate, because it was the only chance for an unexpected victory. This process of the blade was called changing the fate of the one who falls under it, although even Zeke Moore did not know how it would actually change fate. And even when the knight pierced the guy with his blade, he did not understand why he was still conscious. All because Zeke Moore managed to secretly activate the distortion key. Due to this, the blade's attack was distorted on the knight's body, leaving a hole. He was angry and didn't understand where the Demon King got this skill from. Zeke Moore was glad that it worked and angered this impudent knight. The outcome of events was the end for both of them. The knight was gone, but in his mind was the Demon King. Soon, Zeke Moore woke up in a new body and was unhappy, and all because the birds were chirping outside the window, waking him up. The guy was shocked by his body. Looking in the mirror, he realized that he had become much younger. Not understanding why, he began to replay all the events that could have caused this to happen. At the end, the guy used the key that distorts fate. Was it because of him? Zeke Moore tried his best to remember where he got it, but he couldn't. First of all, you should first try to find the key that distorts fate. A man entered the room. Apparently, he was a servant. He turned to the young master and said that he usually always left at dawn, and had he really given that up now too? Zeke Moore told the guy to come closer and punched him with all his might. While the boy was kicking the servant, another man entered the room. The servant rushed to Mr. Biner to protect himself. Did Zeke Moore really think he could handle such a powerful mister? What else can they do? Zeke Moore is his master in words, and he can't just ignore the training of a disobedient dog. These words made Mr. Biner very angry. The guy threw a sheet over the man, blocking his vision. The servant shouted to the man that the guy was behind him. Zeke Moore was already preparing to strike. The guy hit the man on the head with a flower pot. Strength is not all that one must have, and the knight apparently lacked intelligence. With a sly grin, Zeke Moore suggested that the servant finish what he had started. From the windows, one could hear the boy asking for help. Zeke Moore stood before the great door. Long ago in the past, he had been terribly afraid to enter this door, but now he did not care. When he entered, he saw many people, including Mr. Biner, and also a servant. Greg Crepustal was Zeke's half-brother. He told Biner that his father had heard about it all and was disappointed with how easily he had been put down. But his brother reassured him that he had done nothing wrong and that now they just needed to be confident in themselves. Count Wardo Fortress, Zeke's father, told Zeke Moore that he was late. Entering the room, the guy asked without further ado why his father had called him. Father was very angry that Zeke Moore had already forgotten how to greet others. But he wouldn't answer that anyway, so it didn't make any sense. Count Vordo replied that it was all his lousy mind. And how was he going to inherit the county with such behavior? This guy was the main heir to the name of Fortress, and he should at least try. These words surprised the boy very much. Had his father ever seriously thought about passing on the title to him? Behind my father stood a woman, Floral Crepustal, the Count's wife and Zick's stepmother. She smiled sarcastically and told the Count over and over again that this would happen. This boy, Zeke, is completely ill-mannered. Sigmar remembered the two of them well, desperately trying to get past him. Turning to his mother, the boy said that he could not allow himself to treat her with arrogance and disrespect. Having said these words, Zeke Moore demonstratively leaned forward. This feigned performance made the stepmother very angry. If you think about it, it was thanks to these two that Zeke Moore was invited here. Turning around, the boy approached the frame in which the sword hung. Zeke Moore turned to his father and said that he sincerely regretted and admitted his mistake. Everyone looked at Zeke Moore's action in shock. Pointing his sword at Hans, the family servant, with the sharp blade of his sword, Zeke Moore said that he would take this chance to end everything. Their half-brother thought about how he dared to raise a weapon right in front of their father. Their father asked how he dared to point a sword at someone within these walls. Zeke Moore replied that the head of the man who insulted the legitimate heir of the great Count of Fortress should fly off his shoulders. because that was exactly what he had taught him. The stepmother ordered him to stop this. Does he really mean to say that Hans insulted him? In that case, his mother claimed that Zeke, Moore, was lying. If Hans chose his words poorly, he would indeed be killed, and in that case even Miss Floral would not be able to protect him. It is clear that this man is in the Countess, but why on earth would she go so far for him? Halton Boehner said that the elder young master was lying. The stepmother rushed to Sir Bynor to ask if it was true, and he confirmed it. He also added that Mr. Zeke had beaten him and Hans with his own hands. But why did such a knight speak so easily about the fact that he was single-handedly beaten? He didn't seem to be going to admit his sins either. Bynor said he had never told a lie in his life. Was the knight really going to pretend to be innocent until the very end? If so, he should stop talking and prove it with his skills. Zeke. Moore pointed his sword at Boehner. Zeke? Moore turned to his father and asked if it would be a good idea for him too. After all, he could use this chance to finally get rid of him if he lost this duel. After thinking for a while, the father gave permission for the duel. Zeke? Moore said that the father himself can set the place and time for the event. Father had intended to simply scold him briefly and send him away. But perhaps this situation would be a good excuse to transfer the title of Earl to Greg. Zeke. Moore turned to his father and said that he now wanted to change too. He realized that he could not achieve everything he wanted if he remained the same as he had been in the past. Did the guy really mean the title of Count by what he wanted? But the son replied that he wouldn't understand him now, no matter what he said. As he left, the boy said goodbye and said that he would see him at the duel. This body was 18 years old. If you think about it, how weak and naive he was. The guy was standing in the yard practicing his skills. All he needed was his father's attention, but he couldn't even handle a blade properly. After all, his father didn't want Zeke, Moore, to master fencing skills. But then he didn't even know about the essence sleeping inside him, which was majestic and destructive. Usually, the amount of mana available to a person is determined at birth, and compared to a normal guy, his mana was too strong. The explosion that his mana caused threw him into the clearing. He knew it would be too difficult to return to the way it was when he was a demon lord. There was no way that the enormous mana inside him would suddenly awaken. It was comparable to the mana of the missing dragons. And he even received the title of demonic lord. There was really a lot of power, difficulties, and trials. Lying in the clearing, it seemed to him as if someone had planned all these events one after another. Rising from the ground, Zeke Moore told his brother to stop spying on him and to come out from behind the tree. Gray noted that it seemed his brother had finally awakened his mana. But did he think he could only handle this level of ability? The duel with Sir Boehner and the succession to the Earl's title. Grayzo was angry that Zeke Moore was doing something that was not typical for him, and he should just live as he lived before. The brother said that he would keep an eye on the boy, so much so that he wouldn't even feel it. Was Grach afraid that Zeke Moore would take away his title of Count? But that was out of the question. It would be right for Greg to relinquish his earldom if he couldn't defeat the pathetic Zeke. Fortress. So, Zeke Moore is obliged to satisfy his brother's wishes, inheritance of the earldom. Then they should see who wins, as it should be in a family of warriors. Gray was afraid that his brother was asking them to fight each other, but he had no reason to refuse. Now Zeke Moore can assume that he has agreed. Soon he will determine the time and place. Many people gathered in the arena to watch the duel between Boehner and Zeke Moore. Sir Boehner has dutifully absorbed the young master's instruction, and now it is his turn to teach him a lesson. Skills determine the winner here. Zeke Moore will regret not donning his armor. The man shouted loudly and asked if the fighters were ready, and both answered, yes. The guys rushed to run quickly at each other in order to attack first. A second later, their swords touched, and they both tried to withstand the resistance. Boehner's blows were much harder than the boy thought. The knight dealt a large number of powerful blows. He knew that the young master would not be able to defeat him in a fair fight. A huge force threw Zeke Moore aside. The fight continued to gain momentum, and the boy tried his best to hold back the knight's blows. The father and stepmother were watching the fight closely. A man standing near them said that the young gentleman was holding up better than expected. He parried several blows from Sir Boehner. The stepmother thought that they still had the advantage, and she asked the man what he thought. Of course, young Master Zeke has not mastered swordsmanship properly. Miss Floral cast a disapproving glance at the man. People from the stands were shouting for Sir Bynor to finish quickly and stop giving in to the guy. The knight asked the young gentleman if he heard these cries, because the spectators wanted his victory as soon as possible. Zeke Moore somehow held back. In Zeke, Mora's best interest to give up now if he didn't want to get injured. But the guy didn't want to give up because he had just started his fight. In Zeke Moore's head, but he wasn't sure it would work 100%. The guy used the ability to expand the senses. This really let Boehner down. He could barely dodge this ability. As Zeke Moore had expected, his mana was getting out of control and he couldn't manage it properly. People from the stands watched this spectacle and could not believe what they had just seen. The man standing next to his father and mother was amazed by this skill and asked if the Count had seen it. This skill, which expanded the senses, made it possible to unite the blade and the body through mana. Countess Floral was no less surprised that he had learned a technique that allowed him to wield a sword as if it were an extension of his own hand. The knight thought that the stance when using mana was unstable, as if his body and mana were separate, and he could not fully control it. And yet, his opponent was just a pathetic Zeke. Boehner, despite all this, wanted to end these games as soon as possible and, having gathered all his mana, prepared to strike. Having directed all his mana at the young master, he managed to dodge. But his offensive is not over yet, and he certainly won't be able to escape from it. The knight used the ability to cut through space. With great force, the young gentleman was thrown back against the wall, which was left with a large number of cracks. The people shouted with delight, for this was exactly what they had expected from Sir Boehner. But how much longer should he continue this farce? As far as it was concerned, the winner had already been determined. Was he really going to have to fight until the young master's life was in danger? The knight, turning to the audience, boasted of his victory. He was sure that this was the end. With the techniques available to this 18-year-old body Zeke, the knight cannot be defeated. But in battle, you have to fight for real. Zeke Moore rushed to attack Boehner from behind, dragging a heavy sword behind him. The blow sent the knight flying backwards, trying to cough up the dust that had risen up. The pathetic boy was acting like a coward again. Zeke Moore held the blade to the man's throat. Let him try to justify his defeat in a real fight with these words. Eventually, Boehner gave in. But did he know why he was doomed to defeat? All this was caused by impudence and recklessness. The fear that he might accidentally kill the eldest son of the Krepustal family, which he serves. If he doesn't forget this battle, he will become even stronger. The judge began to announce the winner, and everyone froze in shock. Young Mr. Zeke was declared the winner. Fortress. People were outraged that Zeke Moore was cheating and demanded honesty. Father didn't understand when Zeke managed to learn magical techniques and no one else could teach him. The man said that everything was clear to her because this child was already born with magical techniques. Greg couldn't believe it, but it confirmed that he was still okay after being hit by Boehner's space cleavage. At that very moment, Zeke Moore challenged Greg to a duel because not long before he had said that he would determine the place and time himself. The father did not understand what his son was talking about. Was Greg really going to pretend he had no idea what was going on? His father had already given permission for this duel. People were discussing that the rumors about the duel for the inheritance between the young masters Zeke and Greg were true. But who would have thought that the duel would take place today? What were you going to fight for in such a state? Where did Zeke get so much confidence? Zeke ordered him to get his ass here or he would lose. The father ordered his son to go to the arena. Was he really afraid of Zeke when he was in such a pathetic state? Eventually, Gray went down to the arena to see his brother. He noticed the smile on Zeke's face and didn't understand why he was so pleased. Everything about him, his facial expression, his tone of voice, his demeanor, even his fighting ability was different. He was no longer the Zeke he knew. Let him not say that he was going to stand and wait until Zeke attacked. Then Zeke, as the older brother, would have to start first, and he rushed to attack. Their swords touched together, but suddenly Greg noticed that his brother couldn't even hold a sword properly. The wound inflicted by Boehner Ziku was not easy, and he will no longer be able to use magic in this state. There is only one way to quickly end the match with his victory. Taking hold of the sharp sword with his bare hands, Zeke asked his brother if he had ever seen intestines fall out and blood flow like a river. Activating his mana, Zeke broke his brother's sword in half with just one hand. If Gray doesn't admit defeat, he'll die right now. With his other hand, which held the sword, he struck his brother with the blunt end. After Greg fell to the ground, Zeke thrust the sword shard near the young master's face. Seeing the greatness of his older brother and feeling fear, Greg decided to surrender. The judge, coming closer, proclaimed young Master Zeke the winner. A few seconds later, Zeke turned to his father and reminded him of the promise that the title of Count would go to the winner of the duel. These words made my father very angry. He replied that this fucking duel does not solve anything. After this conversation, people concluded that the noble family of Krepostol does not keep its word. However, Zeke expected this outcome. He never wanted to get this damn title. Out of anger, the boy took the ring off his hand and threw it at his father's feet. The countess tried to calm her husband, but he shouted what the hell his son was doing. Zeke simply left the family of his own free will. As he left the arena, Gray told his brother that he could win any fight if he wasn't afraid of death. In order to protect the borderlands of the fortresses from the threat of invasion by foreign troops and everyone else, Gray had to become stronger. Zeke was about to drink the healing potion, but the girl tried to stop him, saying that it was for their young master. Let his family dare to forget the lesson that Zeke more taught today. Zeke was warming up in front of the castle gates. A servant was standing next to him, as well as a large bag with things. A few hours earlier, a servant was carrying laundry in his hands, humming a melody. Suddenly, he bumped into an unknown man and asked in fear who was there. This man turned out to be Zeke. He said that the guy would go with him as a servant, and he, without fully understanding, agreed. After Zeke said that he would leave the servant here and chop him into pieces if he did not go with him, the boy immediately agreed. At this moment, Zeke ordered the servant to take his things. Zeke forgave the lackey who dared to insult him in exchange for simple labor. Perhaps he is too good-natured. He needs the servant to strengthen his stamina, because then he will be useful somehow. And he also needs to make him exercise a little. Zeke from now on. The boy asked Sir Zeke about his plans for the future, and he replied that there was no specific plan. Recalling the events of the past, the gentleman said that they would first go to the neighboring region, Porty. Then, they would simply go wherever their eyes looked. The boys walked along the most beautiful roads and fields. The boy turned to Sir Zeke, saying that this path was not suitable for people. If they went straight ahead, they would cut off more than half the route. Why would they go around the beaten path? The porter explained that if they went away from the places where people lived, they might encounter monsters wandering around, but that was why they went that way. Something moved in the bushes and Hans turned around, hoping he had imagined it. The boys walked on, and the servant hoped that they would pass through this place as quickly as possible. Zeke informed the boy that his first test was about to begin and handed him something that looked like a sword. Hans didn't understand what they wanted from him, and Zeke ordered him to turn around. A monster's head, similar to a goblin, was sticking out of the bushes. It was a small goblin holding a small bat in his hands. Hans was very scared because he didn't even know how to hold a sword in his hands. He asked for a bigger sword, but Zeke replied that he should at least be grateful for that. Otherwise, he would give him a stick instead of a sword. A second later, the goblin lunged at Hans, hitting him in the face with a bat and trying to steal his bag. Watching this, Zeke realized that he still had a lot of work to do if he decided to train him. With a small blow, Zeke knocked the goblin back. Hans didn't understand why Sir was treating him like that, but it was all for his own good. He couldn't just carry Sir's things around all the time. He needs training to even be able to protect himself. Zeke took a potion from his bag and handed it to Hans to drink. After this, Hans must prepare himself because he knocked out the goblin, but he will soon wake up again. Until the evening, the boy trained to fight off the goblin's attacks. Suddenly, Zeke noticed that Hans had managed to dodge the blow and he still had talent. Eventually, the boy plunged his sword into the goblin's head and after that he won. Zeke praised Hans for a job well done as he exceeded all his expectations. It's all thanks to Sir Zeke's teachings. Suddenly, a bottle flew to Hans's feet. After looking where it came from, the boy saw a large number of goblins. Taking some small stones that were lying on the ground, Zeke threw a handful in their direction. They all hit everyone right in the head. Zeke asked his servant why he was so surprised, since this was only the beginning. The boy asked what Sir meant by the beginning, and he replied that he just needed to turn around. Behind him was a large crowd of orcs. The boys were tired by evening and lay down to rest near the fire. Zeke decided to ask Hans why Floral was so fiercely behind him and how he was really connected to her. As it turned out, his grandmother was Madame Florel's nanny. That's probably why Madame was kind to him from an early age. Zeke decided to tell a story. They once had a small servant whom his mother especially bullied because he was the grandson of the nanny who raised Lady Florel. Zeke asked the servant if he remembered his mother, and he replied that she was a wonderful person. She was kind to the people under her command, respected those above her, and treated everyone kindly. In fact, the Count's family hated Zeke solely because of his mother. When he remembers all the evil things she did, Zeke feels sorry for the Count, Florel, and Gray. But that doesn't mean he should blame himself for it. Suddenly, the guy heard sounds similar to a carriage and ordered to get up quickly. Hans was confused because nothing had happened yet. Zeke said that someone was heading this way. It was a carriage passing by. Could they really be traitors? The clatter of wheels is not as loud as the clatter of hooves. If they were merchants, a harnessed horse would be pulling a cart, and the two sounds would be mixed. Did that mean that they were travelers like them? But a normal traveler would not be riding in a carriage at such a late hour. The boys became alert when they heard approaching sounds. Paladins approached the boys, and someone was about to get out of the carriage. It was a woman. She asked them to excuse their rudeness and said that they also wanted to set up camp there for the night. She introduced herself as a follower of Karuna named Aina Lubella. Zeke had previously met this girl, and she blessed him for the coming of strength. The guy didn't think they would meet again. A man stepped out of the carriage. He introduced himself as Vege and served Lady Lubella, a candidate for sainthood. Zeke inadvertently called the man Tasnia's death machine. Zeke decided that he would be kind in this life, so meeting people he didn't know in the past wouldn't hurt. As he understood, they wanted to set up camp here. The man thanked them for their hospitality. They said that they would stay here for only one night. Looking at Hans, Zeke saw an interesting sight. The servant was standing on one knee, bowing before Lady Lubella. The knights began to pitch the tent, but they needed someone to support the end. The girl wanted to volunteer to help the guys, but Hans stopped her and said that he would do everything instead of her. It was quite understandable why Hans was behaving this way, because Lubella's beauty was out of this world. Glenn Zenard recruited only beauties for himself. Suddenly the girl approached Zeke, more, and asked if she could sit next to him, and he allowed it. She was extremely grateful to them for allowing her to stay there for the night. Zeke asked what brought them here, and Lubella replied that she travels in search of stories from all sorts of people. When she meets those in need of help, she bestows upon them a prayer of blessing. It is simply the duty of every member of the Karuviman order. In turn, Zeke said that he is here because he is trying to understand how to live a righteous life. The guy asked if she knew how to become a good person. Someone had told him that he should do more good deeds, and he thought that of all people he would be the best one to consult. There are many different ways to become better. It can help to do something that he is incredibly good at. The guy answered that he is good at things that require strength. Why not then use this power to help those in need? After thinking for a bit, Zeke jumped up and announced that tomorrow he would begin searching for people who needed help. Lubella and Zenard arrived at the city square, where the shopping arcades were just being set up. Zenard warned the girl that he needed to leave for a short time to carry out an order. Suddenly, the girl heard someone's loud scream. Together with her knights, she went into a dark alley. There she saw how some guys were beating up one boy. At that very moment, she ordered the knights to stop. In the darkness, she saw that the guy who was beating the boy was Sir Zeke. A little later, having gathered together in the house, the girl shouted that they should help good people, not bad ones. Zeke said that they apparently needed help, but that was not all. The girl ordered to help only those who were weak themselves, and not to resort to violence against good people. She said they should apologize to this guy. He nodded that everything was fine. He introduced himself as Sude and thanked him for saving him. These were the guys from the Serena Trading Company. They gave an astronomical sum as a bribe to the mayor. They wanted to take away this guy's shop. To them, it's just some old shop, but to Sude, the shop is extremely important because it is filled with memories of his grandfather. So the guy immediately told them that he wouldn't give up the rights to it, and they treated him like this. Lubella assured the guy that everything would be fine and that she would set up a meeting with the mayor of Porty right now. The knight stated that Lady Lubella Karuviman cannot interfere in politics, but she, as one who follows the teachings of Lady Karuna, cannot simply ignore this situation. So she'll figure it out anyway. They should rely on her. The next day, the guys discussed the girl's words because Zeke thought her words were wrong. The guy was also worried that they hadn't returned yesterday, and showed Hans a wanted poster around which a large number of people had gathered. The guy overheard a conversation between two people. They were discussing how Lubella allegedly killed the deputy mayor. The wanted poster listed the girl's name and surname, as well as the crimes she had committed, namely the murder of the deputy mayor and an attempt to curse the town of Porty. Zeke thought that something was wrong here. Turning around, he heard people talking. People were saying that it was because of a witch's curse that their city was in such ruin. The sun was already setting, so they should hurry back before they encountered them. A woman with a child in her arms, as well as men, rushed to run home. People slammed their windows to protect themselves from such incidents. The boys didn't understand what was going on here. Something was clearly wrong, and they should go home too. Walking through the city at night, Zeke thought that something similar had happened in his past life. It can't be that Lubella was a murderer. That never happened, and no one cursed Porty. But something changed because he met her. Hans jerked Zeke's shoulder and said that he thought someone was following them. Turning around, they saw in the darkness an undead creature that looked like a zombie. That very second, Zeke cut off the creature's throat. Hans didn't understand where the undead came from in Porty, and that was what gave Zeke a bad feeling. Two men approached the boys. They were glad that no one was hurt. They assured them that they would deal with the bodies and that the boys needed to go home. One of them held out a torch. He said it was for when the witch's curse would reach them. Hans asked Sir Zeke if he really thought Lady Lubella was a witch, and he replied that it was absolutely impossible. He was sure that the person responsible for this incident simply set up the girl. Zeke thought it was a setup, because Lubella had always been a genuinely good person. Suddenly, the guy felt something behind him and turned around sharply. Hans asked what was wrong, but Zeke suddenly jerked from his place and ran forward. He stopped, looked around the corner and saw a girl. He asked her what she was doing there, looking so ridiculous. Lady Lubella sat tear-stained, disheveled, and in dirty clothes. Zeke got home. He gave the girl some clean clothes and made sure they fit. Hans went out to buy food for dinner, so he will be back soon. Zeke asked where the paladins who were with Lubella were. She hung her head down and said in frustration that it was all her fault, because other people suffered because of her. Zeke held out a poster he had seen in the square today and asked if these events were related. The girl screamed that she was not a witch, but the guy already knew it. Lubella didn't believe that anyone trusted her, but she couldn't do something so evil. Zeke just wanted to hear the truth about what happened to her after they broke up. The conversation at the mayor's house went well that day. Unlike the mayor with his greedy eyes, the deputy in charge said he would take matters into his own hands. The deputy whispered in the mayor's ear that they should at least invite visitors to dinner. Apparently, the mayor realized how inhospitable he had been and ordered dinner to be prepared. At first, Lubella wanted to refuse, but after thinking a little, she agreed. Since her knights were hungry, they pounced on the food like wolves. It was because of her that they made this unexpected visit. After the meal, they went to the mayor to express their gratitude. Entering the room, they saw a horrifying sight. The deputy was lying on the floor. They saw something they should never have seen. The city's mayor was holding a book in his hands and sucking mana out of people. The knights shouted at the girl to be careful. Looking around the other side of the room, they saw that the statue of Bellu had come to life. The mayor was Bellad's puppet. And did the girl only realize it now? Lubella wanted to know what he was trying to do. Isn't it obvious? The mayor was going to sacrifice them all to the Great Bell. He ordered his frantic subordinates to seize the boys. The knights fought off these inhuman creatures with their sharp swords. There were too many zombies for Lubella to handle alone. All this time she was just in the way and getting underfoot. One of the knights asked if everything was all right with Lady Lubella. At that very moment, a monster attacked them from behind. The knight tried to protect the girl by pushing her back, thereby covering her with his body and preventing the monster from taking possession of her. After this story, Zeke Moore asked if this was the Bellad he was thinking of. They are a cult that desires destruction and chaos. They worship the evil god Bel and regularly sow death and terror. What were they trying to achieve in the city of Port? It was only a guess, but the girl guessed that they wanted to perform their ritual here. Lubella saw a sign above the mayor that read, "I offer this city to Bella." Apparently, they want to sacrifice the entire city. The ritual involves erecting idols of Bellu and imbuing them with the life force of the townspeople. The book the mayor was holding in his hands was most likely the catalyst for the statue's power to manifest. After escaping from the mansion, the girl tried to ask for help at the Karuvimana temple, but she failed because the city was isolated. She believed that it was she who had to somehow stop this ritual. Zeke said that he would definitely help her, because it was a good deed. Lubella was worried that the boy would be in danger if he did this, but there was no reason to worry. Zeke left the table. He said that they would go to the mayor's mansion tomorrow night. Opening the door on her way out of the hall, she saw Hans, who had returned from the store and was eavesdropping on their conversation. Zeke told his assistant that he had returned on time because he had one task. The guy said this to Hans in his ear, so that the girl wouldn't hear. This request really shocked the guy because he was surprised and did not believe what was said. The next day, near the mayor's mansion, Zeke managed to climb onto the balcony by climbing up a tree and carrying a young lady in his arms. The boys walked along the long corridor together. Hans was not with them. Finally, they came and stood near the large doors. The atmosphere here was certainly not very good, but it was here that the statue of Bellu stood. Upon entering, they saw the mayor, who was engulfed in a dark aura. Lubella confirmed that it was this man who killed his deputy. Zeke, without thinking for a second, put his sword to the killer's throat. The girl warned the guy to be careful because who knows when he will summon the undead. Lady Lubella was wrong. It was the wrong man. Zeke kicked the man, and he fell unconscious to the floor. The girl got scared and asked for forgiveness for this misunderstanding. A dark aura was coming from behind. Turning to the door, a man appeared in the passage holding that very book in his hands. This was their culprit. The man turned out to be the deputy mayor. He was extremely surprised that they dared to return here. The girl did not understand the full essence of what was happening, but she was sure that the deputy had left them. In the man's hands was a book filled with Belu's energy. Officially, it is called the Key to the Ritual of Sacrifice. Zeke seemed to understand what was going on here. The mayor must have been unwittingly following someone else's orders until he himself died. He was not Belle's servant, but simply a puppet of this man, his deputy. Lubella was already starting to worry about what had happened to her paladins. The deputy said he ground up everyone's bodies and sent them to feed the fish. These words morally crushed Lady Lubella, and she stood in a stupor. The deputy asked who this man was, someone like Karaviman's secret security service. Zeke replied that he was not from Karaviman and had nothing to do with it. The man asked why the guy was there then, and he replied that he didn't think a guy who believed in fish needed to know that. These words angered the man. He said that Zeke seemed eager to experience Belu's punishment. Did this man really think that Zeke would just accept punishment from some dumb fish? The deputy said he would make him repent to Belu in excruciating agony and then finish him off. The man turned into a horrible creature and called his assistants. He ordered to kill Zeke, but to leave the woman alive, because there would be a use for her. Lubella said to be careful and use the blessing technique. Zeke easily defeated anyone who dared to attack him or the girl. The deputy, enveloped in Belu's evil spell, could not believe that the boy had defeated the undead with such ease. Zeke had incredible innate power, which seemed simply amazing. It seemed that some of his magic had returned. The guy asked the man if that was all and if he would summon more monsters. He boldly replied that he could communicate as inappropriately as he liked, but it still wouldn't save him, since the preparations for the ritual had already been completed. But this was not the case, because during this time Zeke managed to find and destroy all the statues of Belu that were in the port. The man was about to say that there was nothing wrong with that, because even this way the ritual could be performed, but the guy beat him to it, because if the priestess of the Karaviman order performed a special rite over the statue, the effectiveness of the ritual could fall. The man was furious. He clenched his teeth and the lenses on his glasses burst. All that was left was to get into the building and destroy the last statue that hung in the air above their heads. Suddenly, the deputy ordered his monsters to capture the two. In 1 second, Zeke managed to defeat everyone with just a couple of blows. The girl's eyes lit up when she saw such incredible power. The boy picked up Lady Lubella because she could get hurt and it was better for her not to move. Now they were going to leave here, but the girl did not understand how, because the entrance was already blocked. Gaining speed, Zeke jumped straight out the window, breaking the glass. Watching this, the deputy only laughed because how stupid it was to run away from someone like him. In that case, he should reconsider his plan. Zeke's disappearance began to spread through the city center again. None of the residents could believe that this nice girl was capable of killing the mayor. But the second newspaper also reported a missing man. The townspeople thought he was a witch's lackey. The boys looked at the newspapers in which they were drawn. Zeke thought he was a handsome man, no matter how you drew him. It was a bit strange since the deputy mayor had seen his face, but it was safe to assume that he was just lazy. But now they need to stop worrying. And better yet, eat, because they will soon need to go. Lady Lubella asked where Sir Zeke got the food, and he replied that he borrowed it from a nearby shop. Should he buy it, given their current situation? The girl was very upset, but the guy told her not to worry because he was not a thief. Zeke wrote down all the places he'd borrowed things, a kind of long-term loan. Lubella asked if such things required the seller's consent. Zeke assured her that they would pay double later instead of this stupid contract. Suddenly, the girl remembered Hans and asked where he had gone. All this time, he had been on a mission sent to him by Zeke. Now their task is to find the Bella idols hidden throughout the city. Did Zeke really know how to spot them? First, they need to go into the slums, because the guy has a rough idea where they could be hidden. There were a couple of guys sitting in one of the alleys. They turned around to see who had approached them. It was Zeke and Lady Lubella. The boys knew he was the witch's lackey all along. These guys started running away, afraid of death. At that very moment, Zeke took off and jumped over them, landing in front of them. Did they really think that Zeke wanted to kill them? The boys were very scared and went into a stupor. These were the guys Zeke helped beat up the dealer in court. Zeke was only able to catch 2 of them, and the guy was yelling at the last one about how he really didn't care about his friend since he was trying to leave unnoticed. The red-haired boy asked why the two were out in public since they were criminals. He shouldn't worry about them. Zeke was looking for someone and asked if he could help. The guys said they wouldn't help because they still had their roof in place, but of course it wasn't all for nothing. Zeke promised a generous reward, showing a bag of gold coins. It could all be theirs. The only thing they had to do was answer his questions. The guy asked if the guys knew anyone who had recently suddenly become ill or died, as if they had lost their will to live. Two of them remained silent, as they apparently knew nothing of such a thing, and the red-haired one angrily shouted that he knew nothing. Zeke smiled and asked why he was acting like that when he had offered him enough money. The guy grabbed the red-haired man and began to rub his fist through his hair, forcing him to tell. Lubella came up behind them and knelt down. She just wanted to ask for something. It was hard to believe, but right now the city was in terrible danger, and at this rate it could turn into a city of death, because the undead were already roaming the area at night. Who knew when something even worse would happen? The red-haired guy screamed that, judging by the frequency, all this happened when they appeared. After all, if it weren't for this witch, his brother would be healthy now. The guy himself didn't realize how he let it slip. And the person the guys were looking for was his brother. Zeke asked the young man to take them to his home, and he was very scared because he was afraid for his brother. The guy grabbed the red-haired man by the head again, and he agreed to go to their house. It was a small old house made of wood. Lubella did everything she could, but he won't get better until they find the cause of his illness. Zeke asked if his brother had crossed paths with anyone recently, and he replied that he had seen everything with his own eyes. This man was that same scoundrel. Has he really forgotten? It was the merchant boy that Zeke had beaten up with them that time, named Sude. The young lady couldn't believe that the guy was referring to that particular Sude. The red-haired guy blamed the guys, saying that if it weren't for them, he would have been able to save his brother. Zeke told me to calm down and tell the whole story in more detail. A few days ago, he came back later than usual and his brother was not at home. He's a pretty weak guy, and they live in the slums without any guards. And the guy was worried that something might happen to his brother, and he panicked. Running down one of the alleys, the boy saw his brother lying on the ground, and next to him was a man who was ready to stab his brother with a knife with dark mana. The man, seeing the guy, started running away. Having caught up with him and pulled him by the shoulder, Sudi's face appeared from under the hood. From that day on, the brother remained in this state. Then the boy found no wounds on his brother, and he woke up immediately, so he thought that everything was fine. But he became weaker and said that he had no strength, and soon he fainted, like a man without life. It turns out that the boy asked Zeke for help when they first met for this very reason. That's exactly how it was. The guy was going to steal the dagger he stabbed his brother with and make a deal. In exchange for the dagger, the guy wanted to ask him how to cure his brother. Although because of one righteous woman, everything went wrong. Lady Lubella asked for forgiveness because she had misunderstood. She thought that a weak person was being beaten. Did she think that because the guy looked like a poor man, or maybe because he looked like a hooligan? Was that enough for her to distinguish the strong from the weak? Zeke told the guy to calm down because the girl is an aristocrat, so she lacks experience. He also asked why the guy wasn't angry with him, since he had also betrayed him then. He explained this by saying that he was the first person to say that he could help them just like that, without any conditions. The boys went outside to take a break, and Zeke asked Miss Lubella what she was thinking about. All she cared about was that she felt Bellu's disgusting energy in this child instead of life force, and the girl was quite sure that this guy was a victim. Then they should probably start looking here. Meanwhile, Sood was bringing in a batch of arriving products for his stall. Suddenly, he heard a noise in the basement and decided to shine a lamp there to understand where the noise was coming from. The guy thought they were just rats, but that was far from the case. It was Zeke. He suddenly put his hand on Suda's shoulder. The guy suggested that they beat him up to the very end today, and there was no need to worry about anyone interrupting them like last time. There was a statue of the spirit of Bellu on the floor in the room. Zeke asked the boy if he saw the heavenly protector who had protected him then, who had returned today as an angel of hell. The guy threw Sood against the wall, and he didn't understand why they were doing this to him. Zeke suggested that he find out the answer to this question from the stupid fish who was standing behind him. Because the guy didn't understand, Zeke continued to kick him over and over again. Sood asked the boy if he thought he was a follower of Bel. This guy wasn't a novice. He was a nasty person who hung around with the guys from Bellet in the hopes of getting a few breadcrumbs from the table. Lady Lubella asked in surprise why Sir Zeke Moore was drawing his sword. Now that they've found the dumb fish idol, they don't need this guy anymore. At that very moment, Sood shouted that he could still be useful because he knew the locations of the other statues. Zeke grabbed the guy by the clothes and began to interrogate him about the places they had been. But he replied that he wouldn't tell him just like that. If he ever lays a finger on Sood again, he'll never tell you where the rest of the statues are. Did it finally dawn on me what a situation Zeke was in? Sood thought that he should have dealt with him and the other slum boys much earlier. The girl couldn't believe that this guy was really like that. Did she still think he was that naive guy? That's why people considered her a witch, because of her naivety. Lubella asked why he was doing this then, since he himself said that he didn't even respect Bella. Obviously, it was about money. This guy was offered a huge amount of money just to give life force to the idols. Who would turn down such a lucrative offer? This stupid old store and the time he had to waste in this rotten place because of his father and grandfather. This is a chance to end it all. The guys had already spent too much time on this, and the guy asked to let him go right now. He promised to tell him where the Belu statues were when he got out of here. But suddenly Zeke more changed his mind. He began to twist the knife in his hands. He changed his mind about using Sood's help and now wanted to finish him off, because he would find the statues without him. And anyway, this guy probably doesn't know where all the other statues are. Sood screamed loudly for Lady Lubella to help him, just like before. He screamed that he was one of the weak, and the Karuvaman order had to protect the weak. With her head down, the girl timidly gave her consent to kill this guy. Zeke only stabbed her in the hand but told her never to show her face again and covered up the girl's horrible appearance. Sood was left sitting in the dark basement with a bloody hand. The guys were sitting in the red-haired guy's house and Zeke brought a loaf of bread for the girl. He also asked if everything was okay with her. She felt like she was making the wrong judgments every time. Even looking at this situation, she believed one side based only on what she had heard about them. She thought that the story about the mayor was also made up. Lady Karuna says that they should not have prejudices. There was no point in blaming herself because it was not she who did this. The girl felt depressed, and she realized that this time she would have to ask this guy for advice. He replied that he didn't really have anything to say, and he didn't think any advice would be able to console her. So she should deal with these problems herself, and no matter what she does, time heals all wounds. Self-flagellation will lead to nothing but your own suffering. The girl felt that Sir Zeke was much older than she imagined him to be. The guy didn't really understand what she meant and asked again, but she didn't give an answer. Now they had to go in search of other idols, and it seemed that Zeke knew the places where they might be. Lady Lubella apologized as she couldn't help in any way, but now she will have the most important role. The guys made their way into one of the houses, in which there were many bodies of the same guys who were hired for money, like Sudi. Now all I had to do was imbue the brush with my holy aura. The girl gathered all her strength and seemed to glow, thereby giving away some of her kindness. Now it was Zeke's turn, and with the help of this brush he painted the Bella figurine. The final touch was for the girl to apply her hand and activate the holy mana. Everything was done. Could they really just leave? Zeke said that everything was fine. The holy aura had already been absorbed, so they should go. Before leaving, the girl looked at the statue again and could not believe that it would actually stop the ritual. There was a heavy downpour with lightning outside. The deputy mayor was sitting in the room. He was thinking about something all the time and sorting through the papers that said that these two were missing. His main goal was to get Lady Lubella. Mr. Vage, holding Hans in his arms, rushed at great speed. Hans screamed and asked to stop right now because he was going to throw up. The man abandoned the guy in the middle of the forest, asked for forgiveness and said that he had to move on. Suddenly, Hans saw bright red eyes in the darkness among the bushes. This frightened the boy very much. He ran as fast as he could, trying to catch up with Mr. Vage. Sir Zeke. Moore and Lady Lubella were walking through the evening city. The girl was wondering if she was doing the right thing now. From that moment on, she always looks for idols and does as Zeke says. But she does not recognize the runes that he draws on the statues. Suddenly, they encountered a zombie on their way, for the first time in a long time. But he looked a little different than the last time. If you look closely, he is slower and wobbles even more strangely than before. Not bad, and it looks like their efforts weren't in vain. Zeke took out the zombie with one punch. The number of undead roaming the city due to the ritual has definitely decreased, and it's all thanks to Miss Lubella. The girl was grateful to God because they really made it in time. Zeke noticed that the expression on her face was not very confident when she saw the runes. Was she worried about his scribbles? Lubella apologized, but it wasn't that she didn't believe it. She just never heard of such methods in Karuvimana. She couldn't believe that it was really true. The person who created these runes must be a genius. Zeke asked her if she really thought so. It was time to finish off the main idol in the mayor's mansion. Since they had dealt with all the idols in the port in the last couple of days, The ritual's power should have dropped significantly. The deputy mayor should also be in the mansion, and most likely, he is going to use that place as the center of the ritual. In that case, they needed to get this over with quickly, so they headed inside. And here, the couple was again near those same large doors. Lubella clearly felt the ominous energy behind those doors. From that moment on, Zeke made the decision that he would go first to protect this young lady. Zeke could enter, he was confronted with a large amount of dark mana. Such actions were extremely unexpected. The girl asked if everything was okay with the guy. He assured that everything was fine, since such a weak attack was nothing to him. More importantly, Zeke didn't sense the presence of the shadow demons. Lubella was scared, not expecting to see such high-ranking monsters. These monsters looked like the real death with a scythe. One of them rushed to attack Zeke. The guy thought that stealth assassinations were all they could do, so at least they would be good at that. Zeke was able to withstand the frontal attack and tore the shadow demon apart. A large accumulation of mana appeared behind him, from which another demon was supposed to emerge. His stealth skills weren't that bad, but their opponent was Zeke himself, who managed to repel the attack. After everything that happened, the frightened girl asked the guy where the shadow demons could have come from, and he explained that the people of Belid must have summoned them. But this could not happen because the ritual should have weakened significantly. This meant that there was one more answer left. Suddenly, the building began to collapse, and stones fell from the ceiling. It seems that this was just the starting point of the ritual. Lubella was very scared, because this meant that everything they had done before had no effect. Of course, that wasn't true, but first they had to get out of here. Zeke thrust the sword, imbued with his magic, into the floor with great force, causing sparks to fly from it. It was a crushing force that swept away everything around. Zeke took Lady Lubella and told her to hold on tight. In that second, they were out of there. A second later, there was an incredible explosion. Stones flew out of the windows and fire blazed. In front of them was a statue of the idol Belu, around which reigned an incredibly large amount of dark magic. This magic destroyed everything around and flooded the houses of innocent residents. The deputy mayor appeared before them, admiring his grandeur and asking if Bella was not beautiful. The man said it wasn't that he didn't like the title, but it would be better to call him by his name. He introduced himself as Alid. Grotum. The girl was all ablaze with anger, and the man asked why she had made such a face. Didn't she like the look? It seemed to her that the ritual was being interrupted, but the drawings they had smeared on the statues had led to nothing. But how did he know about this? He helped them. Grotum posted guards around the area to lead them to the idols. It was all for the sake of bringing Lubella to their order. Bringing the girl here by force was not easy, so he made an effort to get her to come here herself, making her believe that they were successfully preventing the ritual. The man thought that he would come to destroy the last idol, because he heard Zeke say that he would destroy the last statues and return. Grotum deliberately didn't bother with the wanted poster, so that it would be easier for them to move around. In a few hours, the inhabitants of this city will become their loyal army. So this man invited the beautiful Lady Lubella to his place. The girl said that she would never allow their plan to come to fruition, and so she left Grotum no choice. In that case, he would have to use force. A pack of hungry zombies surrounded Zeke and Lubella. The girl thanked the guy, because if it weren't for him, she would have been dead a long time ago. She told the boy to run away from here. She would try everything to stop Grotum. Zeke was surprised that Lubella thanked him instead of blaming him for giving her false hope. The man told the boy not to pretend that he doesn't understand anything when he really doesn't. But Zeke actually knew that the stupid magic runes he drew wouldn't do anything. This meant that the boy was helping them to bring Miss Lubella here. But why then did he do as Grotum wanted? The guy had to buy time for this. Behind him, behind the debris, there was an extremely huge explosion. The deputy probably won't understand what Zeke is talking about. Making his way through the woods as fast as he could, the death machine of Tasnia, Burly Vague, was running towards them. Grotum couldn't believe his eyes, because he had calculated everything so that Vega would not be in the city. But the man was sure that Vague would be powerless against his powerful ritual. Grotum gave birth to a water dragon that towered high in the sky. The girl said that she was a candidate for sainthood and would also fight. It was a big responsibility. Zeke pierced the dragon's throat with his sharp sword. The dragon's birth took quite a lot of Grotum's strength, but the result was satisfactory and no one can survive it. But the boys remained safe and sound, just a little wet. The man couldn't believe that after that they remained intact. But no matter how huge the column of water is, if you reduce the pressure, it will become just a waterfall. Finally, the mighty Vague arrived to them. Grotum began to read the spells. He promised to do everything to sacrifice the man. But before he could finish speaking, Vague immediately swung his sword, causing the deputy to fall to the floor. Grodum dropped his book, on the cover of which appeared the face of a terrifying monster. A bright glow began to emanate from it. Apparently, it was Bella's terrifying mana. Wig felt sick when he thought about this artifact. Suddenly, the statuette fell down into the water. Everyone turned around in horror to look at this. Grodum's face. Finally, this day of judgment had come. Mr. Vague put the blade of his sword to the man's throat and ordered him to stop tormenting them, since the book had already been destroyed. But since the life force was already flowing underground, the ritual was begun. There is no way to stop him now. The ritual will continue until the entire city is engulfed in it. Now, as Bellu's energized underground waters rushed to the surface, suddenly the man realized that nothing was happening. Zeke asked if he wanted to know the reason. The magical runes he drew on the statues were real. These are the real runes for preventing the ritual. Zeke asked what the short-term taste of hope was. Finally, people in this city will continue to live normal lives. Everyone was happy that this horror was over. Vague and Miss Lubella thanked the boys for their help. Thanks to their note, he quickly learned that Miss Lubella was in danger. It was very lucky that nothing bad happened before the man returned here. Zeke simply timed the search well for Hans, and besides, he just wanted to do a good deed. True, Hans had to work like a horse. It was time to say goodbye, and Miss Lubella suggested that they rest a little longer in the temple. But they had already stayed in this city for a long time, so they had to go. Their next destination has been determined. There was a magnificent fountain in the courtyard of the huge castle. Mr. Vague and Miss Lubella walked along the columns. The girl heard from Hans that Mr. Zeke was the eldest son of the Crepustal family. This greatly amazed the man, and he asked whether she was really talking about the great defenders, those of the fortress. But she wasn't sure whether he was joking or serious. In that case, they shouldn't mention Mr. Zeke in the report. If Belad finds out that he taught them runes that could interrupt the ritual, he will declare a hunt for Mr. Zeke. Vague warned Miss Lubella that he was going to meet the Holy Pope. Suddenly, a man appeared from behind one of the columns. He asked if the girl was Miss Ain Lubella. He introduced himself as Glenn Zenard. He was an elite of the Grail Knights who were supposed to come to the aid of the Order, to be able to provide support to Caraviman from outside, and he bowed before the girl. She asked how he knew her, and if they had met before. Zenard replied that people had told him about her. He wanted to introduce himself in a more public setting, but it seemed to him that she was not feeling well. His question might seem rude, but he asked if Lubella was worried about anything, and if she wanted, he would be happy to listen to all her problems. The girl thanked him, but said that she was not worried about anything at the moment, and perhaps seemed worried because she was tired. The guy didn't want to keep her, as she was tired after the journey. He wished her a good rest and said goodbye. Zenard realized that something had changed in her, not far from the mining town of Suola. Even after all this time, Hans continued to train his strength and endurance by fighting various monsters. Zeke praised the guy, because now he can even handle huge trolls. Suddenly, the boys heard loud cries for help from the forest and turned around to look. It was a little boy who was being chased by a crowd of goblins. At that very moment, Zeke defeated them all with one swing of his sword. The boy thanked them for saving him. He couldn't have done it without them. Hans asked why the goblins were chasing him, and the boy replied that he was training to become an adventurer. For now, he is an ordinary miner, but he dreams of going on an adventure. Suddenly, some angry man called out to the guy. He was yelling at him to come here. He was unhappy that the guy couldn't even finish off the goblins on his own. The guy asked Zeke what his name was so that he could definitely repay him later. The boy introduced himself as Snock and wished to see him soon. It was time to stop wasting precious time on nonsense, and a huge orc appeared behind Hans. Snock and the man walked through an abandoned mine, and he told the guy to use his mana to walk. Suddenly, Snock tripped over a rock and fell face down on the hard ground. The man was clearly angered by this behavior. He said that he would not tolerate it any longer and that the training was over for today. The guy was surprised that it happened so quickly, and the man ordered him to get out of his sight. Snock shouted that he wanted to continue. Looking down at his feet, the boy noticed a mole. Since they were in a collapsed mine, it might not be safe. The boy told the mole that this place was dangerous, so he had better go back to his family. But the mole continued to go in the same direction as Snock. The boy asked why he was following him, and did he really have nowhere to go? In that case, he had no choice but to take it with him. Zeke and Hans were relaxing in the bar that evening, and the assistant was curious to know what Sir Zeke was thinking about on the way here. Why did Sir Zeke choose this city as their next target? After all, when they left Porty, he said they would go here. Zeke was surprised that the guy remembered this, but he was not so stupid as to forget something that happened so recently. It's all because of one day, which, albeit slowly, is still approaching. Hans won't understand if the guy tells him. Well, I guess you could call that day the day Sol was turned into ruins by Novum, the god of destruction. Snock took the little mole in his arms, and first he had to give the animal a name. The guy went through many names, but settled on the name Novum. In this mine, Snoke's teacher met an unknown man who was completely covered in a cloak. The man handed the teacher a bag of gold coins and thanked him for his good work. So their deal was complete once he was convinced that the guy had met the mole. This is where we can put an end to this boy's game of being a teacher. Thanks to this man, the unknown person could immediately turn his plan into reality. Hans brought some piece of stone to the market, and the appraiser said that this rock only appears once in 1,000 years. The auntie in the back was holding a bright shirt in her hands and shouting at the guy that this outfit would suit him perfectly. On the other hand, the man shouted for Hans to try the roast marinated in a special sauce. Of course, the guy didn't miss the opportunity to try everything at once, and the dissatisfied Zeke simply watched all this. Zeke wondered how Hans had kept himself under control all this time. Near Zeke, discussing how they always knew Snoke would get screwed. The second asked about the adventurer trainer who had recently gone out of business. This shocked Snoke so much that he now doesn't even leave the house. Overhearing the conversation, Zeke realized that they were talking about that boy. It was the boy from the forest who walked with the adventurer's teacher. It was no wonder that he didn't like that man then, which means he turned out to be a crook. To Zeke, with a belly full of food and a large amount of food in his hands, he shouted that the master absolutely had to try it. Snock lay on his bed at night and couldn't sleep. He looked very tired and exhausted. Novum came to his bed. The guy picked up the animal in his arms to put it on the bed. Snock thought about how good his life was, because he could have fun without thinking about anything. The mole climbed onto the boy's face, apparently to take revenge for these words. Suddenly, the door to the room opened by itself, and the guy stood up to check who was there. He thought he was imagining things and decided to just close the door. The same unknown man appeared in the room behind him. Zeke and Hans walked through the city at night, finishing off food from the market. Zeke told the guy to take off these horrible things from himself, and he was very upset, because the owner of the shop said that they looked great on him. Mr. Zeke looked up and noticed something flying from roof to roof. It was a large number of people, all dressed in dark robes and hooded, carrying Snoke's body in their hands. Hans saw this for the first time and was very scared. Zeke immediately realized that this was the boy he had seen then, but he didn't understand why these people had grabbed him. Perhaps it was worth catching up with them. It could be an opportunity to do a good deed. Zeke ordered Hans to return to the inn. He handed the boy all the food he was carrying. Zeke said that he urgently needed to run somewhere and rushed to run from the spot. The man jumped from roof to roof trying to catch up with the gang. He shouted at them to stop and talk, as he had business, you see, with the luggage they had carried off, and one of them turned round. Zeke more prepared his knife to strike if necessary. The guy stabbed the man who was carrying the guy in the body. Their group decided to go down to avoid something like this. Zeke approached them to ask who they were. One of their group ordered to finish off their pursuer. People rushed to attack carrying sharp daggers. Well, of course, Zeke managed to dodge the attacks, although it was easier for them to simply answer the question. Using his abilities, the guy hit one of them in the knee. Snoke's body began to run away. Zeke had no choice but to continue running after him. After some time, they found themselves in a dark forest, and the guy did not understand where they were going. An unknown man ran into one of the abandoned mines. The guy wanted to go inside, but his path was blocked by several people in robes. Without thinking for a second, they began to attack. Zeke Moore, with a couple of swings of his sword, was able to defeat them all, but something was clearly wrong here. Even if these people were assassins, they were too skilled. Where did they even come from? The reason Zeke came to this town is because of the impending disaster. And how come these guys just showed up out of nowhere? The boy approached one of the wounded people to ask if they were related to the deity of destruction Novum. When Snock came to, his friend was immediately taken away from him. He tried to snatch it back, but he got punished for it. The man grabbed the guy by the throat and lifted him up so that he was hanging in the air. The unknown person thought the guy was a coward, but did he act like that because of a special relationship with this mole? Suddenly, the man let go of his hand and Snock fell, hitting the rocks hard. After clearing his throat a little, he asked what the man was talking about. Looking around, the guy realized that he was in that very collapsed mine. He began to carefully examine the mountain of fallen stones. The stranger asked if Snock was looking for something on the other side of the rubble. His face was a silent question. How did he know? There was nothing special about it. It was just that the boy's eyes reflected despair and sadness, as if he was looking at his father's grave. This man knew Father Snoke very well, and he told him to look more closely where the light was coming from. There was a sealing stone there. It kept the beast of the mine under lock and key. Snoke's father accidentally hit the sealing stone while excavating, and thanks to this, he awakened the beast of the mine, after which the mine was filled in and his father was buried alive in the process. The one who stole his father from him and caused the boy's hatred of mining was a mole. The boy was simply overwhelmed with emotions: anger, resentment, rage, and disappointment. The man brought the mole to Snoke and told him to pass judgment on the monster he hated. The boy looked at him in surprise and did not understand how Novum was involved in this. But, as it turned out, this boy was the cause of the earthquake that killed his father. This mole was the beast of the mine. Just think that he would be walking around like part of the family of the one whose parents he killed. The man ordered that revenge be taken on this bastard immediately. The man Zeke asked about Novum blew himself up, and they had to get out of there immediately. He even blew himself up extremely clumsily, as Zeke's clothes almost burned up. These assassins use fire magic and are equipped with artifacts. On top of all this, they are also connected to Novum. Who is behind them? Zeke Moore was already familiar with emanated from the entrance to the abandoned mine. But it was too late, and Snoke was already possessed by Novum's control. Zeke asked the guy if the assassins had taken him away and what was happening to his aura. Snoke didn't respond, as if he wasn't even conscious. Zeke asked him again if he knew Novum's name. After this question, the guy's face changed to something more terrifying. The man jumped back from where he stood to suddenly protect himself. Zeke no longer recognized the old Snoke. He was driven by some demon. The guy was known for his extreme rationality, but here he was in a blind rage. Having gained enough momentum, Zeke was ready to strike with the sword, which was controlled by magic. If he doesn't want to see blood, then it's better to pull himself together, and Zeke made the last control swing. But Novum surprisingly survived this, even though that amount of power would be more than enough to knock out a normal person. Now, he is even more resilient. Zeke Moore noticed that the blows from the stones had become much stronger. It can be assumed that with enough nourishment of this kind, he will awaken as a tyrant of the land. So we need to stop him before he gets stronger, and the guy goes on the attack. Novum raised sharp stones from underground as a barrier. But all this was of no use, and Zeke managed to break through them time after time. Suddenly, out of nowhere, an assassin appeared and was able to stop the blow in front of the boy's face. He said that if he killed others, he would go to hell after death. The assassin, with a little effort, threw Zeke back. This man somehow combined Snoke with a mythical creature of the land. Zeke asked if he had united Snoke with the land tyrant Novum. These words made the assassin very tense, because no one should know that this boy called the mythical creature Novum. This man asked where the boy got this information from. But Zeke replied that his well-being depended on it, so he couldn't say. This only angered the unknown man, and he began to gather mana in his hands. In that case, Zeke left him no choice, and he was going to use force. Gathering a ball of mana, he put his hand to his chest. The man's clothes began to tear on his body from the enlargement of his arms and legs. A second later, a muscular man in torn clothes was already standing there. Novum considered the assassin an enemy and suddenly attacked him. But since the boy's body was too small, stopping him was not a problem. The man easily tossed Novum aside, as he currently needed to pay attention to someone else. Zeke asked if he thought it was okay to do that. It seemed to the man that Zeke Moore had put quite a bit of effort into creating him. Since the boy was currently enraged, that meant he was not conscious. He just needed to find a body after he was done with Zeke. Now that nothing else would disturb them, it was time for them to have some quality time alone, and the assassin rushed to strike. One by one, Zeke's sword stopped them. He finally stabbed it into the assassin's body, and it seemed that was it. But such an attack was not scary to him, and he laughed, looking at his hand. But a moment later, it exploded and separated from the body. After a couple more strokes, there was practically nothing left of the previous appearance. Well, be that as it may, Zeke was interested in where that kid had gone. Meanwhile, Hans was running through the forest, and he heard some sounds that sounded like an earthquake. Turning his head and looking down, he noticed the body of that same boy. He turned him over and tried to wake him up. When Snoke came to, his eyes were glowing bright red. The maddened Novum had an extremely powerful aura around him. He used his magical abilities to lift an incredibly large stone into the air. Hans was frightened and jumped back. He didn't understand what was happening to him. What kind of training had he received to be able to do this? Just recently, this boy was just training to become a young adventurer, and now he was doing this. Hans knew he would die if he got hit on the head with such a boulder. The demon threw a huge stone at the guy with great force. Hans realized that he couldn't dodge, and if he couldn't dodge, then he had to cut it down. As he realized, it was just nonsense and could be easily dealt with. But when he looked back, he saw tons of earth flying towards him. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a stream of water appeared that was able to stop the earth. It turned out to be Zeke, who was finally able to find Novum's body. Zeke flew into the possessed guy with his hand. It was the only way to bring him back to his senses. After being affected by the magic, Snock began to scream loudly in pain. Waking up in the mine, the boy saw his pet Novum. He looked very fierce and mad, but Snock wanted to take his friend back. It seemed like someone had taken over his mind, and at the same time he was dreaming about Novum. It was true that his father died because of the earthquake he caused, but he realized that his father's death was not Novum's goal. He just got out because his cave was broken into, and his father was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Snock apologized to Novum, believing that he had been offended, and he would gladly return to those days when the guy knew nothing. But it is unlikely that this will ever happen. So the two of them need to figure out how to live on. The boy extended his hand to the mole, and the mole extended his hand in return. A large number of people, as well as guards, gathered at the site of the battle. Inside were detectives trying to figure out what happened that night. Sitting in the kitchen of the small house, Zeke asked Hans if he had done everything as he was told. The boy replied that he had done exactly as he had asked, telling the detectives that he knew nothing. He just climbed the mountain because he heard a loud noise. But Hans was worried that they would find out that the boys were involved in this incident. Zeke reassured his friend that he had dealt with the bodies of the guys who were guilty, so they would never know the truth. More importantly, they can't even imagine that a miner like him was involved in this. Since they formed a contract together, he won't go berserk anymore. And it seems like Snoke's mana is a perfect match for Novum. Zeke asked the guy what they were going to do now. Snock thinks that Novum was the one to blame for his father's death, it's true, but he can't just forget about it and pretend that everything is okay. Does he really mean to say that he's not going to just forgive Novum? But then why not think of something? He wanted to be an adventurer so much that he took lessons from some rogue. Then how about doing some good deeds together? The three boys stood on the lawn around an overgrown rock. Hans looked very tense and exhausted. He gathered his strength and rushed to attack Snoke. This boy tried to protect himself with the ability to awaken sharp stones, but Hans managed to cut through them time and time again. But despite this, he was worried about the condition of his new friend, Zeke. Moore watched them train, but neither of them were focused, so he added another hour. As the night approached, the boys gathered around a small fire to roast some meat. It was so delicious that tears came to their eyes. Snock asked where they were heading next, and Zeke replied that it was a city called Osperin. The two guys were surprised and asked again because they didn't know where it was. Before Zeke returned, he had 4 demons serving him. One of them was from Osperin. I wonder what he's like now. The boys noticed a sinister smile on Zeke's face, which scared them a little. The next day, the boys walked through the forest for a long time. Finally, they saw the castle towers sticking out in the distance. Suddenly, they smelled a strange smell. Zeke replied that it was the smell of burning flesh. The guy immediately began to wonder whether it was a raid or just a fire. A sound was heard from behind the bushes and everyone turned around. There were 2 knights who held out their swords. They ordered their names to be given. Snock and Hans were terribly frightened, but Zeke answered instead, saying that they were just travelers. He also did not understand what the knights were doing there. The guy explained to them that they had come here to find a place to spend the night. The two went off to discuss something. One thought they looked like travelers. All the roads leading to this settlement were blocked, and these guys must have crossed the mountains to get here. But they couldn't be sure that they hadn't escaped from it, so they had to get them to the camp first because they could also be infected. Even after moving away, their conversations could be heard. Zeke heard about some kind of infection. The knights asked to go with them. It was a small settlement with a small number of tents. When they arrived, everyone stood up and looked around. Richard, approaching one of the tents, told the young gentleman that they had found a suspicious group. Entering, Hans stumbled awkwardly, almost falling over. The gentleman asked what the problem was. The knight replied that they found them in the forest, and they also said that they were travelers. The last one to enter was Zeke, Moore. The gentleman said that it didn't look like these guys were from the settlement. The gentleman turned out to be a majestic guy with dark long hair and red eyes. He introduced himself as Joachim Dracula. He commands a special unit sent to this settlement. Zeke immediately recognized this guy. He was one of the 4 guys who traveled around the world with him. It seemed as if only yesterday they were walking hand in hand through fire and water. and they also celebrated new victories over a glass of alcohol. Zickmore also greeted the Lord by placing his hand on his heart and bowing. He introduced the guys he came with, as well as a little mole named Novum. Dracula, asking where they came from, immediately apologized. The guy replied that they had just arrived here from Seoul. He was training his subordinates in the mountains, so he did not know that the roads were blocked. Dracula thought for a couple of seconds, but made a decision rather quickly. He believed Zeke's words, but the knight was extremely wary, because they could be fugitives from the settlement. However, Dracula had no intention of letting them leave this place. Zeke thought that even at this time this gentleman was so charismatic. Since the boys are here, they will have to keep the camp company for a while, because there is a contagious disease going around the area. The man asked if the travelers knew about this. It was possible to guess from many things. An infectious disease had spread throughout the settlement, and they were sent here to prevent it from spreading further. Since the boys came into contact with them, they too may be infected, and therefore the master cannot let them leave the settlement. Hans thought that even young Master Zickmore understood the seriousness of this contagious disease. Zeke realized that this was a good opportunity to do a good deed and offered his help. Suddenly, a knight runs into the tent in horror. He shouted that a patient with new symptoms had appeared. Everyone who was there immediately went to the infected person. When I entered the tent, there was a man lying on the floor who felt terrible. Lord Dracula ordered the knight to document the man's symptoms and follow protocol. This kind of experienced reaction was expected from someone who had once been Zeke's subordinate. Looking at Dracula, the boy saw that he felt sick and grabbed his head. He asked if everything was okay since he looked pale. The man was simply a little frightened by what he saw inside. As it turned out, Dracula had hemophobia. It was simply impossible since, before Zeke's return, he was known as a vampire. He had the ability to control blood, and now he said that he was afraid of it at all. Zeke looked at the guy and thought about how Dracula could lie to him. While it seemed like the guy was actually like that at one point in time, it seemed very strange considering he was a vampire. His hemophobia only brought him problems. Apparently, Dracula wasn't going to go into detail about the story, but it sounded a lot like the Dracula Zeke knew. Even before Zeke, Moore returned. The only thing Dracula told him was where he came from. Zeke decided to support his old friend. He was sure that one day he would be able to overcome this, and soon he would get so used to it that he would even be able to take bloodbaths just as a hobby. After this, the boys were unable to leave the settlement, and they helped Joachim and his soldiers. The boys tried their best to help get rid of the disease in the settlement. They carried heavy boxes, and it was even like a kind of training. But as a result, an unknown man spilled gasoline on the ground and set it on fire. Soon the flames spread throughout the city, and a catastrophic fire broke out. The surviving people stood on the hill and watched the disaster. Just think, not a single person survived. Dracula regretted the deaths and the fact that the settlement was burning. He regretted the lost comrades and the wasted effort. This was very different from the Joachim that Zeke knew. Joachim was grateful because without their help they would not have managed. It made perfect sense, since Zeke was a world traveler doing good deeds, just like the guys who came with him. This act was very noble on their part. The people from the settlement have already reported what happened to the castle and should soon receive orders to return. And if it's not too much trouble, Dracula would like to invite everyone there. Of course, the guys didn't refuse the opportunity to keep him company. Suddenly, a knight ran up, shouting that a message had arrived from the castle. Mr. Joachim began to read the letter and was stunned by what he saw. Zeke wondered what was written there because Dracula looked very tense. A second later, he said to get ready to leave. The knight was already glad that they were returning to Osprin, but it was not so. They were going to another settlement, one that was stricken with disease. It is very strange that he is sent again to another settlement suffering from illness, despite the fact that he is a member of a noble family. This is not usually done. Apparently, the whole point was different. They wanted Joachim to become infected with the disease and die. There was a man in the castle. He was very angry and shouting at some guy that he was saying that this disease was serious enough to destroy an entire settlement, but for some reason this bastard was still breathing. The other man bowed before him and asked for forgiveness. Luck must have just been on his side, but he had previously said that other soldiers and doctors had already died. Then why was this one still alive? Out of anger, the man took the vase and threw it. Fortunately, the vase did not hit the man, but hit the wall nearby. The evil boss ordered to come up with a new plan, and this time one that would actually be able to finish off this idiot. A small hole was dug in which the bodies of the dead people were burned. As a result, the disease devastated this settlement as well. And again, there is no order to return to the castle. Suddenly, Mr. Zeke heard something in the bushes and prepared to draw his sword. Activating his magic, he commanded those who were there to show themselves. A whole bunch of assassins whom he had already met before flew out at him. They pulled knives from under their robes and threw them at the guys. Zeke managed to beat off each of them with his sword. They were Black Hoods. They looked similar to the ones from last time. Zeke ordered Hans and Snoke to take one of each. The guys stood in horror, because they were not ready for this. But at this time, Zeke had already rushed into the attack. If Zeke kept thinking about it, he would only get a headache. He was going to grab one of them and extract some useful information. This man behaved exactly the same as before, and an explosion occurred. It was the same artifact that the man in Swole had. They even had the same methods of fighting. But why did these guys come here then? One of their gang, picking up great speed, was heading towards Zeke. Of course, Zeke managed to cut off this attack. They had to think carefully because their goal in Swole was to make a demon out of Novum. Assuming that their goals here this time are also similar, then most likely they need Joachim Dracul, who will one day become a close companion of Zeke more. Could his becoming a demon-like human have something to do with these guys? If demon-like people can be created. But wait, in this time period, demon-like people started appearing all over the world. So often that people began to call this period the era of demon-like ones. If they were the ones who created all those demon-like people, but no, they couldn't have created them. Zeke is sure that there were those who naturally became like him. For a second, he wondered if becoming a demon lord was part of this plan too. From the moment Zeke left the Count's residence, strange events began to occur, as if according to someone's plan. And all these incidents pushed Zeke to become a demon-like person. At first, he chalked it up to bad luck, to the chaos that had engulfed the world. But if this was all part of a plan, then the villains were using Zeke more, the demonic lord of power, as a puppet. Zeke found this curious as hell, but he wasn't going to forgive it. With a sinister smile, he prepared to tear apart the culprits. Snoke were already asleep in the tent, and Zeke was throwing wood on the fire. He wanted to catch at least one of them for interrogation, but they all committed suicide by blowing themselves up. If their goal was indeed to turn Joachim into a demon-like human, then they probably considered Zeke an obstacle, since he suddenly teamed up with Joachim and helped him. Zeke wondered about Dracula's demonic nature. It seemed to him that it was better to remain an ordinary person in this life. Suddenly, Joachim came to the fire and noticed that Zeke was not sleeping. Dracula asked if he could join in, and Zeke, of course, allowed him. They sat together, looking at the burning fire. Zeke was still puzzled by the question of why Joachim had become a demon-like man. For someone with hemophilia to begin using the blood possession ability, there must be a compelling reason. Zeke said Dracula didn't look well. He explained that he was thinking about his father. 6 months have passed since my father lost consciousness and never woke up. Joachim wondered how he would have acted, what he would have done differently. Now it was clear why the first son held power in his hands. But if you think about it, he is older than the rest, and it is natural that he took over the reins. Suddenly, a knight ran up to the young master. He reported that an order had come from the castle to return. Apparently, the disease has spread to Osprin. The entire settlement returned to the castle. The evil man turned out to be Joachim's brother. Gritting his teeth, the brother somehow managed to squeeze out the phrase, "Welcome." Zeke was surprised at how different two brothers could be. Dracula's brother had fits of aggression and mental disorders, while Joachim only looked sick. The only thing they had in common was an unhealthy build. The butler stood next to his brother. The brother was sure that Dracula had already heard about what was happening, that the epidemic had reached Osprin. He said that Joachim had not been careful enough and had allowed her to reach the castle. The knights discussed the stupid logic of Dracula's brother, but he, being merciful, gave them a chance to correct the situation. He ordered to go and stop the spread of the disease in Osprin and not to return until it was completely eradicated. The brother did not want to allow Dracula to catch the infection, and the very thought of it was disgusting to him. Of course, Dracula understood his feelings. But how did this situation look from the outside? They restricted the quarantine zone where the infected people lived and established enhanced security measures. About 60 people died. The doctor said it was probably Igrum. Igrum is a common contagious disease. But something was wrong. Zeke thought it was the same infection that had spread throughout all the settlements, but they were all different. It seemed that someone was behind this and was controlling the unfortunate people. But perhaps the same man who had made the world freeze in fear of disease had begun to act. It was the demon-like man Festus. The spread of such a common disease was unlike him. It was too different from what had shaken other cities. It looks like he had a different plan. This meant that Festus was somewhere here, and Zeke had no choice but to lure him into the light. Dracula reasoned that there were fewer deaths than in other cities, so they had a chance. But what about the medicine? The knight replied that several doctors had tried to develop it, but no one had succeeded. This answer stunned Joachim. Apparently, creating a medicine was too complicated at the moment. Suddenly, Zeke called out to the master and said that he could prepare a cure for Egram. They entered the room where the sick lay. Joachim asked if the medicine was ready, and Zeke held out a flask of yellow liquid. Before the Zika regression, when pest infections swept the world, scientists and researchers developed a cure for Egram. Zeke learned the methods of its preparation because Joachim was then interested in infectious diseases. But who would have thought that it would be useful now? The guy lifted the patient's body a little and gave him some medicine. Hans and Snock were surprised if it would actually work. The patient asked for some water. It seemed to work, and Zeke would write down the formula for this mixture for Joachim. Before this, he was practically unconscious. Dracula said it was a cure for an extremely common disease, and Zeke could become incredibly rich if he monopolized the formula. But the guy wasn't interested in money, and besides, he tried to bring goodness to this world. This touched Joachim very much, and he rushed to Zeke to hug him tightly and thank him for his help. Meeting Zeke was the best thing that ever happened to Dracula. Zeke didn't really like such long hugs and asked to let him go. After some time, the patients began to recover and people continued to drink this medicine. The doctor collected the wrong medicines, and Zeke showed him the right ones. Now that Zeke has created a cure for Egram, it's time for Festus to show up. Suddenly, someone arrived at their small camp. These were knights together with brother Joachim's butler. The butler was looking for Sir Zeke more. He wanted to find out where the boy got the cure for the disease. He immediately galloped to the guy as soon as he heard the news about the mixture. Could this old man really be Festus? We need to make sure of that immediately. Zeke and the butler were sitting at the same table, on which lay a large number of packages. The butler was quite sure that he asked the boy how he learned about the methods of combating the disease. And Zeke was quite sure that he told him about what he read about them in the book. This tone of conversation made the man very angry. He said that the guy was completely ill-mannered. If this were true, then what was the book? Zeke Moore replied that he did not know, as he had read it a long time ago and could not remember. This means that the methods of treating other diseases should also be written in that book. But the guy said that he only read about the games in that book. A disgruntled Joachim burst into the room. He asked what the man was doing. Sir Zeke saved Osprin. Didn't he realize how indecent he had been? The butler bowed and asked for his forgiveness. The man left without even answering. Dracula apologized to Sir Zeke for stepping out of line, but it didn't matter. Zeke remembered seeing him in the castle. The guy asked who this man was. I remember he was standing next to Joachim's older brother. This is Dracula's family butler named Besnol Shalom. He was previously the captain of the knights, but he had to retire after being injured and has since worked as their butler. So why was he so angry with Zeke then? Joachim replied that he was probably worried that the cure the master had developed could elevate Dracula's status over his brother in the struggle for succession. Shalom supports brother Joachim in becoming his successor. Zeke considered the possibility that Shalom was Festus, given his reaction. He couldn't be sure because of Joachim's intervention. Dracula heard that Mr. Zeke Moore lacked the specialist to prepare a sufficient quantity of the potion. It turned out that someone had volunteered to help him, so he came to introduce someone to him. A nice lady in a long, luxurious dress and a large hat entered the room. She introduced herself as Greta Bargot. She was also the owner of a company of the same name. Zeke greeted her back, immediately wondering why such a beauty was dressed like a widow. Joachim introduced Miss Bargot as the owner of the Bargot firm. This girl is extremely interested in infectious diseases and constantly sponsors their research. In addition, she is quite educated in this field, and Dracula is sure that she will be able to help them. The girl brought herbs and other materials with her in case they were missing something. Miss Bargot asked if she could study the formula of the drug. Since she was well educated on the subject, Zeke was sure that it was he who would need to learn from her, and not the other way around. A large number of heavy boxes were carried into the knight's tent. The girl said that Egram was mainly spread through water sources. This meant that they would first need to block access to them and make more of the mixture. Hans and Snock watched the cute couple as they gave each other lots of compliments. Anyone else might have thought they were dating. The girl held a plant in her hands and asked the guy if he knew about it. This plant would be useful in case of a cold. Looks like Zeke will have to learn a lesson from this lady. Ms. Bargot said she was initially drawn to the cause by her family and now she is here. But it wasn't that her family members were also studying diseases. Suddenly, the girl became a little nervous and said that she would like to introduce Mr. Zeke to her family. An unknown man entered the room where the person was sleeping. He poured an unknown mixture into him, which caused the sleeper to feel unwell and cough. This unknown man turned out to be Shalom. He said to accept the nobility because it was just his karma. Zeke and Miss Bargot came to her parents' grave. The guy thought that she wanted to introduce him to her family, but certainly not to the cemetery. The girl explained that her entire family died from an infectious disease. That's why she started studying different types of infections, because she doesn't want anyone else to lose their loved ones like she did. Zeke asked why she was wearing mourning clothes. Miss Bargot explained this by saying that she had vowed that she would only lift her mourning when all contagious diseases had been eradicated once and for all. That's why she wanted to show Zeke the graves of her husband and son, so that at least no one else would die from the Igrim. She felt that she had already said too much and that they should go back. She suggested finally putting an end to this damned game. Zeke thought, sure, only if Festus wasn't behind this, he thought. When they returned, Hans and Snock looked at Sir Zekmora strangely. Hans asked if the young gentleman had seen the affair with Miss Bargot. There are already rumors among the soldiers that they have become a couple, and rumors tend to lead to prejudice. Zeke didn't understand what the problem was, even if that was the case. What kind of man would he be if he wasn't attracted to a beautiful lady, he thought. Hans had already thought that he was a model of Buddha. Snock told his friend that he probably shouldn't have said that to Sir Zeke. Zeke thought about how they now looked like a couple to everyone else, along with Miss Bargot. He just wanted to find out more about her, which was why he stuck around. She announced that she would help as soon as he developed a cure for the Igrim. And besides, she knows a lot about different diseases. There is still a possibility that she is Festus, and in general, he finds her more suspicious than Shalom. But she doesn't act much like a demon-like person, so he'll have to watch her for a little while longer. If Zeke had known this would happen, he would have asked Glenn about everything before he died. Only Glenn knew who Festus was and about Zeke's regression, since he was the one who killed the bastard. Although he probably wouldn't have told anything anyway. Suddenly someone called out to Sir Zeke. It was young Master Joachim and his knights. They reported that the Count's men had taken Miss Bargot. Zeke asked why this had happened. Joachim explained that they had said they wanted her to look at the gentleman's condition, but he was still going to go and figure it out himself. It is very suspicious that they took away Miss Bargot, the key person in treating the sick. This means that Festus may be in the Count's castle. Perhaps it really is Shalom. Zeke wanted to go with Joachim to the castle, but he asked him to stay in the camp. Joachim said that if Zeke left too, there would be no one left who could properly care for the patients, and besides, it was their family squabble. If they took Miss Bargot away with bad intentions, then Joachim is obliged to return her safe and sound, no matter what. So Zeke will stay at the camp to wait for him. If something happens, Joachim will send a messenger. The knight approached the butler Shalom and said that young Master Bium wished to see him. Shalom replied that he did not think that there would be an opportunity to keep the young gentleman company today. Several days have passed since then. Hans told Zeke that only this building remained. Apparently, the residents of the settlement should be there. Bad news has arrived. It looks like a plague with game-like symptoms has reached a nearby village. The knight wanted Sir Zeke to figure out what was going on there, since he had the necessary medical training. Zekmore agreed to go and find out what was going on. He also asked if the young gentleman had reached the castle yet. The knight said that he was fine and asked to quickly go to the settlement. Several days have passed since Joachim left. There was a feeling that they would do something to him if Zeke didn't agree. The guy opened the gate to the house, and inside, they saw something terrible. Inside, on the floor, lay the bodies of people who had already died from the disease. There was a guy in the building. He asked who these people were, because entry was prohibited. The boys explained that they had come here from Osperen to observe the disease. Since they are doctors, the guy invited them. He didn't think it was worth talking about this among the dead, and suggested going into the next room. Hans and Snock sensed something was wrong and tensed. Zeke seemed to get the gist of it all. As a safety measure, he took out his sword. With the help of his magic, he directed it at the guy. His servants did not understand what he was doing. The owner of the house managed to repel his attack. The guy, holding a sword in his hands, wanted to strike back. Zeke deftly overpowered him and dealt the fatal blow. Snock still didn't understand what was going on here. Zeke used magic to throw the sword, causing a powerful explosion. The butler Shalom appeared among the rubble. Zeke was not so naive as to fall for such a stupid trap. The guys were already standing ready for any action taken in their direction. Zeke ordered the boys to fight side by side. Shalom noted that the guy was quite smart for a cheeky boy. He ordered his subordinates to kill them. But the guys dealt with each of them with ease. The locals were indeed there, but they had apparently been forced to gather. They were also clearly infected, given their appearance and movements. So, Shalom was going to hide behind the backs of ordinary people who don't even know how to fight. This old fart behaved exactly like Festus. Zeke told Snoke and Hans not to kill anyone who didn't look like an assassin, but to leave them barely alive. Hans twisted the arm of one of the residents and asked if this was okay. Civilians could not be killed, but they also did not have time to deal with them in a good way. Now this old man must understand that his end is coming soon. It was time to reveal his cards. Eventually, they managed to defeat all the infected inhabitants, and only Shalom remained. In a panic, the butler called Krobet. Krobet turned out to be a huge goblin with an axe. Hans and Snock stood in horror at what they saw. Zeke had never seen Festus, but he remembered this monster for sure. He was one of Festus's subordinates. This finally confirms that this old man is at least somehow connected with Festus. This huge monster was approaching them. With his size and strength, he was able to break through an entire wall. Zeke's blows were like blows to a rock. It was very annoying for him to fight such creatures. Shalom mocked them. He asked them how they liked the power of Krobet. Zeke struck the monster again and again. Festus's subordinate dealt a devastating blow to the ground with his axe. Zeke lunged forward to attack from behind. This monster's skin was incredibly tough. Things were going badly, and it looked like he was going to have to step up his game. The guy now has more mana than he did in the mines, but it still won't be enough to finish them off. He decided to make up for the lack of mana by using mana resonance. All that remained was to wait for the right moment to deliver the fatal blow. Zeke plunged his sword straight into the monster's chest. It was the Raging Hurricane ability. The butler watched their fight in horror. He couldn't believe that the boy had such an ability. Suddenly, he noticed that a huge hurricane was approaching him. Eventually, Zeke's mana caught up with the monster and defeated it. The impact left a huge crater, but it was still not as powerful as before. Zeke approached Shalom and claimed that he was the one behind the spread of all this infection. He saw the weapons his assassins were using, the same ones the guys who wanted to drag Snoke to Swole were using. Zeke asked why Shalom worked with the guys in black cloaks. Shalom replied that he didn't have to explain anything to him. It was all for the sake of restoring justice. The butler wanted to destroy Dracula's family, and if he had a little more time, he would have been able to achieve this, but Zeke ruined all his plans. Shalom knew that he should have been finished off first, but now, he just wanted to keep the boys here, and his plans for Dracula's legacy would come to fruition. Shalom took out a bottle of potion and broke it, causing an explosion. Zeke calmed his charges and said that it was an ordinary smoke bomb. Now they had to go after him. They were going to break into the castle. Meanwhile, in the castle, Joachim sat in the basement, chained. Now the boys had to go to the castle. Joachim must have been having a hard time right now. Zeke noticed something unusual on the body of one of the patients. A small red mark was visible behind the ear. Billy Dracula dared to lock Joachim in prison, but how did he gain control of the family castle? It was a pitiful sight. Joachim promised that he would return Miss Bargo, and in the meantime, he was here. The guy was worried and hoped that everything was fine with her now. An unknown person came to the castle's dungeon and saw that Dracula was not doing well. But how did this man manage to get into a place where only incorrigible sinners are imprisoned? The man said it was amazing that Joachim still had life in his eyes. The man said he had come here to help him. He held out his hand, in which lay a bloody vessel. The man said to put it into his body, and then he would be able to gain great power. Then Joachim will be able to overthrow the brother who wants him dead, as well as all the others who follow him. Surprisingly, Joachim refused the offer. He had no idea who this man was. He was not so stupid as to swallow something offered to him by a stranger without question. But according to the plan, having become angry with Bilom, Joachim was to accept the bloody vessel without a single doubt. The man believed that it was all because of that guy who invented the cure for Egram. Because of him, Joachim's hatred for Biom weakened. The man kept trying to get the gentleman to eat it, because then he would tell him the whole truth. He said that there was a man involved who could control infectious diseases at will. Didn't he find it strange that all sorts of infections suddenly appeared out of nowhere? All these illnesses were the work of one man. The man said that it was a conspiracy between that same man and brother Joachim. They did this solely for the sake of killing Dracula. Biom Dracula sent diseases to all the nearby settlements just to kill him. Of course, in Osperin they spread the weakest of them called Igram, because they themselves live here. That's why they put Joachim here. They had no other choice because he still couldn't die. Joachim, angry, rushed to the cage. Wasn't he on his brother's side? The man agreed because he helped him, because his brother was needed temporarily. If Beyond becomes a count, the whole world will turn into hell on earth in a matter of minutes. Is the gentleman really going to give up the chance to save the whole world because of some trifle? The man reached his hand through the cage, a bloody vessel in case he needed it. If he wants to protect what is dear to him, he must consume the blood vessel. Zeke? Moore entered the dungeon and asked if these words sounded wonderful. He asked if the man would give him the opportunity to buy the thing from him. The man clearly did not expect such a turn of events. Everything was not going according to his plan. Zeke was curious about what the hell was in his hands. Maybe he wanted to tell him about it too. But the man said he didn't understand. Zeke replied that he should be more understanding of those who had already been attacked so many times, but he did not need to report it. Zeke said that doing business with a guy like him was no fun at all, and his colleague he had dealt with before was not that boring. The guy came up with a theory after meeting one of his comrades in Swola. They were an organization that created demon-like creatures from humans. Zeke suspected that the man had just been about to make one out of Joachim by feeding him that bloody vessel. Now the assassin understood that this plan had failed completely and utterly, and he had no choice but to hold out until reinforcements arrived here. Zeke really wasn't going to talk. It wouldn't be easy to get anything out of him. Suddenly, they heard some sounds and turned around. The man realized that this was reinforcement. Snoke and many others entered the dungeon and reported that they had recaptured the place. The man was extremely angry because he had already hoped for his victory. It looked like the man was trying to stall for time. Wasn't that what he wanted? I wonder what it's like to have this brief presence of hope. The man, unable to bear the tension, rushed to run away from the castle dungeon, shouting that they should all be cursed. Zeke yelled at Snoke to go berserk and use a large amount of his mana. The fleeing man noticed that the ceiling had begun to collapse. At the end of the dungeon, there was a huge explosion, and rocks and debris flew around. A huge stone hand appeared from under the ground. There was a young gentleman in it. Zeke praised Snoke for a job well done. One of the knights ran up to the young gentleman to make sure he was okay. He noted that everything was fine, but it looked like he was injured. Then they had to go upstairs. Joachim had to deal with his brother for everything he had done. Zeke asked the gentleman if he seriously thought that his brother was to blame for everything. After some time, everyone went upstairs and walked along the long corridor of the castle. Zeke looked at Joachim and thought about how he had interacted with his subordinates before. All his actions were very different from the Dracula that Zeke knew in his past life. Thinking back to when the two were sitting around the fire and Joachim was saying that he really thought his brother should take over. The Joachim that Zeke knew would have inherited the reins long ago. All the guys, along with reinforcements, burst into the room where Shalom was. Inside, Joachim saw his brother lying on the floor at the butler's feet. Shalom said that apparently that idiot couldn't handle it since they were here. He also noted that Zeke managed to survive once again and save Joachim. Dracula clearly asked Shalom if he was the man behind everything that was happening. And was he the one spreading all these diseases? The man asked if they had only just realized this. He agreed unconditionally and said that he was that man. He was also the one who brought their father to this state. Looking at the boys with wild eyes, he said that he did it in order to bring their family to justice. Joachim did not understand what he was talking about, but a second later, he remembered Miss Bargo, and it was important for him to know where she was now. But Zeke objected to the young gentleman. Zeke explained that Shalom was just a puppet. Suddenly, someone entered the room and everyone turned to look. It was Miss Bargot. She was surprised that Sir Zeke was still alive. Joachim asked Sir Zeke if the one he named could be the real criminal, and he agreed. It was Madame Bargot. She was the one who spread the epidemic. To top it all off, Shalom was also Miss Bargot's assistant. Joachim became very angry and started yelling at Shalom for repaying his father's kindness in this way. Shalom took the sword in his hands and ordered his master to be silent. The butler asked Dracula if he knew what his so-called father had done to gain the status of landowner. More than 10 years ago, when the epidemic hit Osprin, his father turned everything upside down in search of all sorts of methods to stop it. To some extent, this even bore fruit. However, it didn't take long before all his methods ended in debt. And his father, finding himself under financial pressure because of them, secretly spread the epidemic again where he was in debt. Joachim could not believe that his father was capable of such a thing. The huge sums that people had lent out of trust in their father disappeared in the chaos of the disease. Even Shalom's friend, the only previous owner of the Bargot firm, fell victim to the epidemic, so the butler decided to carry out a trial of his family together with Miss Bargot, the wife of his deceased friend. Zeke shouted at the old man and said that if he wanted revenge, then let him do it right. But was there any real point in killing other residents who had not committed crimes? He himself said that his trial should be only over the Dracula family. Shalom said that they are all fools, they know nothing. They praised Count Dracula. This crime is already enough. As far as one could judge, Zeke didn't look like a count, just like everyone else. Shalom took out his sword and held it in a threatening manner. Zeke ordered the others to step back a little. The butler simply became furious because these guys didn't know anything to talk nonsense. He rushed to attack Zeke. After the blow, all that was left on Zeke's face was a wound and blood flowing from it. Zeke Moore realized that Miss Bargout had set Shalom up. The girl said that it seemed that a big mistake had been made somewhere because she did not want revenge. She just wanted a lot of people to get the disease, that's all. But if the reason was not revenge, then what was it? Madame Bargout plunged her sword into Shalom's back. She found a compelling reason just when her family fell ill. It happened suddenly. Her husband and child, who had been fine just the day before, came down with a high fever and started coughing up blood. Perhaps it was because it was so contagious that even the doctor did not dare to approach them. Miss Bargoat could have gotten sick too, but she overcame her fear and nursed her husband and child. She loved them so much. The girl had already seen similar suffering hundreds of thousands of times, and she looked at their faces, which were becoming paler and more lifeless. And at some point a thought came to her. How beautiful are the faces of those who die from illness. Bargoat is truly grateful that Count Dracula introduced her to this kind of beauty. At some point the knight could no longer listen to this. He asked his master only to give an order. It was necessary to imprison this madwoman, for whom the death of her fellows was some kind of entertainment. Miss Bargoat asked what would come of it. They didn't think that the girl had brought all this here just like that without any particular reason. After all, in Osperen, as far as was known, the sick had caught the infection. Joachim began to worry that she still had hostages. Apparently he was one of those people who thinks quickly. Dracula asked who her hostages were. The girl smiled madly and replied that these were absolutely all the inhabitants of Osperen. Could so many people really get sick? But Bargoat specialized in infectious diseases. Joachim realized that things were going badly. The girl just wanted to start her conversation, without having time to finish what she was talking about. Zeke interrupted her and said that now she was finished, and began to take out his weapon. Miss Bargoat felt sorry because she thought that at least he wouldn't behave so childishly? Or was it because he couldn't believe her words? Mr. Zick replied that he trusted the words of the previous owner of Bargoat. Well, in that case, did he really order all of Osperen's people to be sacrificed? Even if the guy had two options to choose from, and even if he decided to sacrifice Osperen, the girl would die anyway. Hans butted into their conversation. Because didn't the master say to live peacefully? Zeke was still going to kill this woman. But didn't he understand that then the inhabitants of Osperen would perish? She was an inevitable sacrifice to save the lives of others. Zeke's words may seem cruel to Hans, who dreams of being a real hero straight out of a fairy tale. But people still have to make choices sometimes. And there are moments like now when a terrible choice is right before your eyes. If he really wanted to be a hero, he had to be able to make decisions, even if it meant accepting pain. And should they let this woman escape from here and then lock themselves away forever in some remote mountain? Or should they go along with her and start an epidemic, spreading it everywhere? And then it turns out that those people whom they will sacrifice are somehow worse for them than the inhabitants of Osperen. By the way, he said to live in a good way, but he didn't say that you need to live in such a way that when comparing, you choose the better option. Miss Bargoat asked if the boys were going to end it all. Zeke had been talking about this for a long time, and he should have finished earlier. Suddenly, Joachim ran up to the guy and said that they couldn't just sacrifice all the inhabitants. The gentleman assured that the inhabitants of Osperen were safe, and all his words were the pure truth. However, when choosing between Miss Bargoat and the people of Osperen, one must really think about which one to give up. After all, her conditions will not work from the start. At the moment, the treatment of all residents of Osperen has already been completed. Miss Bargoat was not prepared for this. The taste of a little hope was so sweet. The girl didn't believe his words and said that he was lying because how was that even possible? The guy replied that if you get sick with what she created, redness begins to appear behind the ears. And these are the symptoms of Galderim. It seemed that this is it. At first, Zeke saw this and understood from the inhabitants of the neighboring village, which the girl took under her control. And on the way to the county, he was already sure when he noticed redness behind the ears of one of the residents. That's why he finished their treatment before he came here. Mrs. Bargoat said that even if he had known everything, he would not have succeeded in getting treatment. The entrails of desert ginseng, which are part of the medicine from Galderim, are an incredibly rare component. It is impossible to obtain it in such a way that it would be enough for the medicine of absolutely all residents. Zeke didn't understand what they were talking about because he took kulkyum, that purple grass that grows along all the roads. In simple terms, it is a weed, so supply and demand for it as an ingredient was not a problem at all, and creating a medicine for it was easier. The girl got really angry and started screaming at him to stop laughing. Was he really trying to tell me that the disease she had created could be cured with some grass from the side of the road? But isn't this the peak of its ability? That's because the holkium had previously had a wonderful effect during the bubonic plague. But even if we assume that the guy immediately found the cure, how did he manage to spread it throughout all of Osborne in just one day? And so secretly that no one in the county noticed. But wasn't she the one who told him about it? If the medicine is in liquid form, it will have almost no taste. While they were preparing the medicine together, the girl told him that the infection was mainly spread through water sources, which meant they needed to block access to them and prepare more of the mixture. Zeke added medicine to the well from which people usually drink water. The girl gave him information about how the epidemic spread. He used it to create a cure. And just before leaving for the county, Zeke checked that the red spots had disappeared from those who drank the mixture. By now, everyone has probably already undergone treatment. And of course, every single resident of Osborne has already been restored, without exception. So now he had enough reasons to kill her. Miss Bargut had not expected him to go so far. That was what people who were hostile to her usually said. But then she had no choice, and the girl took out a certain flask from under her clothes. She didn't want to use it ever anyway. There were purple spots visible on her hand under her gloves. She immediately turned into a demon-like person. She didn't want to show herself as such an ugly person. The boys looked at her with horror and thought she was a witch. Her new look looked terribly beautiful. There was an incredibly huge flow of demonic energy around her. Joachim Dracula ordered his servants to tie her up immediately. The girl's hands turned into something like a huge flower, which moved towards the knights to grab them. The servants fell to the floor, unable to withstand such great force. Very soon they will start coughing up blood and will start to develop red spots. Things were going very badly, because if you touch the plague blood, you could immediately become infected. Zeke ordered an immediate evacuation of the regular soldiers, and Hans and Snoke had to leave and take care of the people of the county. Of course, Joachim did not want the same fate as his father and brother. He immediately ordered the evacuation of ordinary soldiers and the knights to deal with the witch, but under no circumstances to touch the blood. The gentleman hoped that Sir Zeke would be able to take care of himself. Now Bargot was left alone with Mr. Zeke. The girl tried to strike to infect and kill the guy. Zeke was tired of all this, and such opponents would be magicians. The girl noticed that Zeke was a good guard, despite his character. The guy managed to dodge her time and time again. That's why the girl wanted to make a fuss. Zeke activated his magic and tried to overcome her mana. If he touches the plague blood, he will catch an unknown disease, and if he inevitably gets cut, it will definitely splatter everywhere. But no matter how much you cut the girl, her wounds regenerated, and it will not only be exhausting but even worse. If so, the parts that have not yet grown back must be cauterized immediately. Zeke plunged his huge sword into the girl's shoulder, which immediately set the place on fire. The guy asked her how she felt about these new sensations. She replied that it stung a little, like a small wound. Her body did not regenerate. The girl only began to fight more actively. Did he really think that she would just go and die right here? The girl began to run away from the room. Zeke thought it might be better to destroy her outside the building, but no. She couldn't go outside the county under any circumstances. He couldn't believe that he was running back and forth like that to reduce the damage to the residents. If the demon lord Zeke Moore had seen this, he would have clicked his tongue. The girl screamed for the guy to stop following her and finally leave her alone. The guy replied that he was following her when she let go of her welcoming tone. It sounded disgusting, to be honest. Finally, the girl stopped near a small cliff. The guy was about to end this friendly game of tag. Miss Bargot turned and screamed at him to stop. She offered to make a deal. But then she was pierced through by some strange bright light. Zeke watched her burn, not understanding what was happening. The guy walked up to her to look into her eyes one last time. An unknown silhouette appeared among the trees, dressed entirely in a white robe. Could it really be he who was behind the magic that was happening now? Miss Bargot was burned in the fire, and only ashes remained of her. Zeke turned to the stranger standing behind the trees and asked who he was. The girl took off her hood, and behind it appeared a girl of incredible beauty. She asked if this guy was Zeke. Fortress. But how did she know him? Zeke thought that perhaps they had seen each other when they belonged to the same family. But then, he would not have been able to forget such a face. The girl leaned over and said he wasn't Zeke. Fortress. The atmosphere suddenly changed dramatically. Didn't she recognize him? She raised her head and said that he was not Zeke, but Zeke Moore. The guy started to attack her, but she put up a magical barrier. Because of him, the blow was reflected and the guy flew to the side. This girl knew the name he was called by in the days of the demon lord who did not yet exist in this world. But who was she then? He had to try to talk to her. Zeke stood at a distance from her and asked how she knew his name, but apparently she wouldn't talk that easily. Since she didn't want to answer, Zeke asked her to go on a date with him. It seemed very sudden, but she aroused his interest. She began to prepare her magical ability. It was the most vile date proposal ever, and she sent the beams through the barrier. Her strikes were too fast, but Zeke still dodged them. The girl was casting some kind of spell. How did she use shorthand to create spells and their effects? And before, her magical barrier appeared in a matter of seconds. She didn't even have to say a spell to start using magic. One of her blows injured the guy's leg. He wasn't paying enough attention this time. Yes, this woman was said to be a high-level magician. How could she use high-level magic at such a young age? With the help of her incredible abilities, a large amount of energy appeared around her barrier. The girl said some abbreviation again, and after that there was an incredible blow. Zeke tried his best to fight it off with his sword. The guy flew up to try to attack from above. She squatted down and kept her hands on the ground, reciting the spells. A huge boulder appeared in front of her and the sword struck it. This girl was incredibly skilled at fighting. This huge stone, which grew out of the ground, pushed Zeke away. There was fire around the girl, with which she defended herself. The fiery core headed towards the man. Zeke thrust his magic sword straight into him. After this, there was a huge explosion, and the sword was shattered into pieces. Gathering all his strength into a fist, Zeke tried to block the fiery core. Surprisingly, his incredible magic was able to block the blow. The rays of this ball reflected and injured the beautiful body of the woman. It didn't work out very well. This made the woman very angry, and she was determined to attack again, but with greater force. After casting a new spell, a circle appeared behind her, from which a huge crystal grew. It reached such a size that it almost pierced the guy. Zeke stopped him with the magic he had gathered in his fist. Even if only for a short time, it seems the girl stopped. It was very strange that if she was so trained in battle as a mage, she could use magic without stopping. Of course, something similar happened to him when he was reborn, but that was because his still inexperienced body could not withstand the impact of a full-fledged battle. More and more crystals grew from the circles, but they were already much smaller. By the way, her technical skills. At such an age, such unique magic cannot come out. And besides all this, it's very suspicious that she knows the name Zeke Mora. Suddenly, it dawned on the guy that perhaps she, too, had been reborn in a second life. If she was also reborn, then that explains everything. But for those reborn like her, she seems to move somehow strangely. And it seems she can't stand the pain. Initially, in a person who has such fighting skills as hers, one cannot say that pain is something unusual. Zeke couldn't describe it in one word, but it seemed like her experience was artificially obtained. Suddenly, someone called out to Sir Zeke. It was Mr. Joachim. He noticed the wound on the boy's leg and asked if everything was okay. Zeke calmed him down, but said that it was better to move away because he could get hurt in a fight. Joachim was accompanied by guards, as well as Snook and Hans. The knight looked at the ground and saw the remains of Miss Bargud and asked if he had really finished her off. But it wasn't him. Did he mean to say that it was that woman who turned Miss Bargud into this? It was she who managed to do it in just one blow, since she was a high-ranking magician. The knight stood in front of the boy, trying to protect him. He didn't know what had happened here. But if she had attacked Sir Zeke first, should they treat this girl as an enemy? At first, Zeke wanted to agree, but then he remembered that it was he who attacked her first. This surprised the knight very much, as he did not expect this from him. Zeke explained that he had heard such shocking words that he had done it unconsciously. Yes, except for the fact that she knew Zeke Mora, he had no reason to fight her. It could also be believed that this girl helped get rid of the plague. Mr. Zeke shouted at the white-haired beauty that what had just happened was his mistake, so he apologized. But she also didn't say who she was. The girl asked if the guys with him were his subordinates. The guys were just his colleagues, if you can call it that. This explanation surprised the girl very much. Zeke thanked her for finishing off Miss Bargud. Thanks to her actions, the village was not harmed any further. The girl couldn't believe his words. But Zeke didn't understand what was going on and what surprised her so much. She asked again if he cared about people suffering. This girl actually knew Zeke Mora before his reincarnation. Previously, she knew him as a majestic demon lord. The guard who was trying to protect Mr. Zeke started yelling at the girl. He asked how she dared to speak in such a tone to the hero of Osperen himself. She was very surprised that Zeke Moore was the hero of Osperen. The guard confirmed it. Sir Zeke had shown so much virtue for their county. She didn't believe that this guy was really Zeke and asked what his last name was. To which the guy said that it didn't matter. He was just Zeke, and that's it. The guy knew what she knew about him and how much, but there was no point in imposing her thoughts on him. Now he was neither fortress nor more, so that was it. The girl stood and thought about something. No one could understand what she was talking about. There was no more time to waste on this. Zeke said that if she didn't tell who she was now, she would be torn to pieces as an illegal trespasser. The girl clenched the fist she held near her chest. An incredibly bright light began to emanate from her, blinding everyone. Zeke immediately realized that this was some kind of artifact. The boys covered their eyes with their hands from this blinding light. Hans looked around and realized that she was gone. The creation of artifacts even with a low rank of magic is already not weak. But it cannot be that she also has an artifact of super high magic with her that allows her to move through space. Zeke thought about it and realized that he was actually interested in who she was. The boys were standing near a small church. Joachim said that his father and brother would not be able to get to heaven. The guard said that this was the price of redemption, and he was sure that the master was ready for it. Joachim expressed his gratitude for the boys being present at the funeral. But all these words were unnecessary, because all of Zeke's actions were done from the heart. Perhaps it was necessary to organize a chase and find out who exactly that magician was. Zeke said that everything was fine and she used the artifact anyway, so it was impossible to find her trace. He thought that she definitely knew him in a past life, so now he needs to slowly unravel it. Joachim had already heard that the three of them were heading further. The boys had only stopped in Dracula's county on the way, and now they had to go further. Dracula asked if they would consider visiting their county, and he guaranteed better treatment, but Zeke refused, as he does not like to stay in one place. And even if he doesn't exist, nothing terrible will happen to Dracula's count. And all because Joachim is now the new count. But if it weren't for Sir Zeke, Osperen would have suffered great misfortune. During the battle, Dracula still resisted his fear of blood, but in the end, when it was all over, he fell down exhausted. The head of the county, Dracula, turned out to be a Germanophobe, which looked very pathetic. Zeke took out of his pocket the cannonball that an unknown man had previously offered to Joachim in the dungeon, and asked if he would like to try it after all. Joachim was surprised, because wasn't this the same thing that was in prison back then? After the battle was over, the guy pulled it out of the rubble. As long as Dracula lives as the count of their kind, there will come a day in the future when hemophobia will become an obstacle. And to prevent this from happening, he will need such a thing. This blood vessel would grant him blood mastery. The name sounded like something not very good. This is an ability that allows one to manipulate the blood around him as he wishes. But due to excessive greed, one can become obsessed with it. If Joachim begins to thirst for the blood of others, it will cause great chaos. Zeke reassured me that there was no need to worry about such things. Was there really some way to prevent this? If his mind is captured, Zeke will come and kill him with his own hands. Soon evening came and Joachim sat at his place of honor. A guard entered the room and brought a large stack of documents that he needed to look at. The count looked very tired, because earlier at this time he was already in bed. But who knew that he would begin to miss the times of his weakness from illness? The guard noted that the blood vessel had indeed produced a strong effect, and Dracula became much healthier than before. The man also asked how his bloodlust was doing. Joachim said that sometimes the desire to have a snack arises, but after a while it disappears on its own. Apparently, there really is no need to subjugate the blood of other people. A little blood flew in the air under the Count's control. Now it was clear what it looked like when he controlled blood. The Count thought it would be useful to be able to defend himself, so he trained from time to time. But how did Sir Zeke know about all this? Until the very end, he did not reveal who he was and left. But is there such a need? Mr. Zeke is the savior, the one who protects their county, and in Dracula's county that status is quite enough. Joachim, looking out the window, remembered that he had a task for the guard. He was supposed to investigate the man in black who helped spread the plague and the mage who attacked Sir Zeke. Zeke and Hans sat near the fire and Snock slept behind them. He lay hugging his mole. The guy couldn't get the thoughts about that girl out of his head. She knew him before his reincarnation, when he was called Zeke Moore, a demon lord. Had he ever met a person with such an appearance? In terms of skills, she is somewhat similar to the demonic lord of magic. In the second half of the Mine Age, he was one of the demonic lords along with Zeke. the embodiment of horror itself. He was fluent in all kinds of magic, and they even crossed paths a couple of times. But then it was a man, and an old man at that. No one specific came to mind. Zeke would never have forgotten something like this before. But if that girl came back like him, then she has something to do with the key that distorts fate. Who knows, maybe that girl was the one who moved him into herself. All these thoughts were just assumptions, but it was still so strange, her face and emotions. Why was she looking at Zeke like that? Hans called Sir Zeke. He wanted to talk about what he said last time about how the priority was to deal with Miss Bargo and not to save Osprey. Zeke thought the guy didn't like it, but he couldn't help but understand. To prevent multiple victims, he couldn't ignore the one in front of his eyes. Zeke asked the boy who he wanted to become, a hero or a god. Even he, such a super genius, will not be able to achieve absolutely everything he wanted, and in the future, there will be no such person who can. It is difficult to accept right away, but you cannot be at a loss at the moment of making a decision, because this is the worst thing that can happen. Hans asked the gentleman if he really thought the boy could become a hero. Zeke replied that if he wanted to, then go ahead, and as long as Hans remained under Zeke's command, he would help him in any way he could. The boy also asked if there was a way to make a decision that would save more people, and he replied that there was. There is nothing special about it, you just need to become stronger. In other words, it means training even harder. In the morning, the sun began to rise among the mountains. Since sunrise, Snock has been training against the bloodthirsty wolves. They attacked him in a whole pack, but the boy used his abilities against them. He was already afraid that he would not be able to defeat them. Hans also trained with him and defeated everyone with his sword. By this time, the boys were tired and Zeke came over to ask if they were finished. Zeke checked the wolves to make sure they were definitely dead. Hans asked why there were so many monsters here. Snoke was also interested because right in front of them there was already a village. Zeke thought about the fact that there really were too many monsters. What was so special about this area? Suddenly someone called the boys from the forest. It was an older man. He said the boys looked strong and asked them to help him. The man said something about the orc. There's an orc roaming around this mountain, can the guys deal with him? Otherwise you never know, maybe something bad will happen to those residents who climb here. The boys looked at the tracks left by the monster's huge foot and thought about it. Snock showed this to Novum. It seems there really was an orc here. Hans suggested that perhaps they were moving in a group. The first thing you need to do is look for other tracks in the area. Snock asked if they could find anything with just this one clue. Zeke isn't very good at tracking down traces, but then how are they going to search? Their plan was to walk, look, listen, and feel. Zeke told the boys to follow him, so there was no other way. Of course, Zeke can't compare to the professionals, but he knows the basic principles of working with holds. His range of sensations is wide, and Hans and Snoke walk very fast. They will definitely be able to find the orc in a few days. Suddenly, Zeke noticed someone and thought it was the undead. It was a small child. But what was he doing so far in the mountains? The boy was just skin and bones, as if he was about to fall down without strength. The boy thought only about how hungry he was. Zeke held out a fresh loaf of bread and said it was very tasty. He asked the boy if he wanted to try. After that, they stayed in the village inn and combed the mountains. And a few days later, they found the orcs and their habitat. Their liquidation took place without any problems. The man who asked them to eliminate the monsters couldn't believe that the guys didn't need money. In gratitude, the head of the village treated them to a hearty dinner, calling them a lifesaver. And that boy who came across their path, he constantly helped Zeke do good deeds. Zeke fed the boy. The boy was worried about what people thought of him because he didn't come to beg. But Zeke replied that little ones shouldn't reject gifts from adults. But his mother told him not to accept anything from strangers. But she was talking about bad adults. Zeke was a good grown-up uncle back then. But Zeke rejected this and said that he was a bad adult who was trying to live a good life. In the evening, Zeke sat with the boy and watched him eat a bun. Zeke told him to eat more slowly, otherwise his stomach would hurt. He then washed down his meal with water from a bottle. Today he was going to take half a bun home again because mom and dad were working hard. He wrapped the rest of the bread in a handkerchief. Zeke asked what the boy's parents did, since he received food from him. He replied that this was not the case. The whole village was saying that the uncle was a good man and that he had even caught orcs. Zeke found it very funny that people spoke of him as a kind person. He suggested that they come to their tavern later, and there was no need to look at him as if he were some kind of criminal in an alley. The boy explained that if people like him entered this place, the swearing immediately began. But Zeke had talked to the owners, so he had nothing to worry about. The boy asked his uncle why he was doing so well, since all the other people hated him. It was like the situation with Timmy, the red-haired guy in the first city they visited, the first time someone told him that they would just help them without any conditions. These words really shocked Zeke. Compared to them, Zeke was indeed kinder. But didn't he call himself a bad adult who tries to live a good life? Then he will be a bad adult who lives kinder than those same kind people. The boy laughed loudly because he did not understand how this could happen. There's just a strange man in the world called Zeke. He started ruffling the boy's hair. I wish there were many people like Uncle in the world. If that were the case, the world would be a really cool place. It was already late outside and the boy had to go. He took the food and waved to the kind uncle. Zeke wanted to ask him something, but before he could turn around, the boy had already left. He ran and thought about how happy his mom and dad would be, but if he accepted things from his uncle so often, it would be impudent. Tomorrow, the boy was definitely going to ask what the kind uncle's name was, so that he could definitely repay him someday. There were two men standing near the trees. One of them was handing over a bag with an unknown filling. The guy had never seen a man before, and what was he doing with his uncle from the village? There was a strange atmosphere around them. The boy wanted to pass them by as quickly as possible. The unknown man took off his hood. It was a scary man who noticed the guy. His appearance frightened the little boy, and the handkerchief with food fell from his hands. The guys in the house were already asleep, but only Zeke was sitting at the table. He thought that next time he should give the boy something other than just bread. By the way, they didn't even know each other's names with this little guy, but they communicate so well, maybe they really did become such good friends. Meanwhile, the boy, all in tears, tried his best to run home. Hans and Snoke dealt with a large number of orcs and asked Zeke if it was enough. Snoke said that in the places they had inspected before, they had cleared everything out again, and these were the only monsters there were. Zeke thought about how there was no sign of any monsters approaching, and there was a distinct feeling that their numbers had diminished. Perhaps these creatures were the ones that had been driven up the mountain by the change in the strength of the local monsters. At least for a while, this village will no longer be harmed by monsters or beasts coming down from the mountain. Now they could continue on their journey. The villagers thanked the boys for their help. Thanks to them, they stayed alive. The man asked how he could repay them for their kindness. Hans said there was nothing special about what they did. Snoke noticed that the boy was not in the village today because he was always here when they came down from the mountain. Zeke wanted to see him one more time before leaving. Suddenly, one of the residents asked if they meant the child who lived behind the palisade. Come to think of it, he hadn't seen him for a couple of days, but he usually comes to help with all sorts of household things. Hans assumed that the village was not only here, and perhaps the boy decided to go somewhere else, but they were still worried because they did not see him. Zeke turned around and told his subordinates to move on. But where were they heading this time? Had Zeke already decided what their destination was? Zeke wanted to try to go to the boys' home. They came to a small settlement that had not been watched for a long time. People once lived here, but now the area has been destroyed. Zeke, with the help of his magic, did not sense a single trace of people. But what could have happened to that sweet boy? Suddenly, Zeke realized something and jumping up started running. He jumped to the entrance of one of the houses. He immediately felt that someone was dying. The guy opened the door with a kick. Inside the house lay the bodies of two people. Suddenly, Zeke heard someone groaning. There sat that boy by the wall, wearing a torn t-shirt and with some kind of mark on his chest. Zeke immediately ran up to him and tried to bring him to his senses. Fortunately, the guy was still breathing. The guy felt a strong dark aura coming from the mark on his chest. The boy opened his eyes and saw his uncle, who immediately asked how he got there. The uncle explained that the boy had not shown up, so this time he came to him himself. Zeke immediately asked what happened and who did this to him. The boy saw an unknown man for the first time in their village. He was a strange man. He suddenly appeared at night. First they killed his father, and then his mother. This stranger said that if the boy did not scream, then his mother and father would remain alive. But he was in so much pain and he tried his best not to scream. But in the end, he still killed his parents. It was done for his amusement. The boy tried to say something about his parents and also something about the death of people in neighboring houses. He blamed himself for everything, that it was he who was to blame for their deaths. Zeke patted the boy on the head and told him not to worry because it wasn't his fault. He asked the boy if he had seen the guy's face, and he replied that the man had no hair and a strange tattoo on half his face. Suddenly, he felt pain where the mark was. Zeke gathered the magic in his fist and used it as a catalyst. After this, there was no trace of the mark left, as if nothing had happened. The boy had already done a good job, so Zeke was going to figure it out himself from now on. The baby wanted to thank him for saving him, but before he could finish speaking, he lost consciousness and died. Finally, Zeke put a bun in the guy's hand. Hans and Snook burst into the room and were horrified when they saw the bodies on the floor. Zeke told them to get ready to set out. They were going to go to the one who could avenge this child. That person was Saint Miss Lubella. The guys stood near the house at night and burned the bodies of the guy's parents and him. Snook hoped that their souls would go to a better place. Hans didn't expect Zeke to even arrange a funeral for a boy he had seen a couple of times, and now was even going to avenge him. He didn't think Zeke was doing all this out of a sense of justice or anything like that. It was a good thing, of course, but Sir Zeke wasn't the kind of person to act on something like that. However, the fact that the death of this boy made his favor useless, and on top of that, the person he cared for died such a cruel death, these two things definitely hurt Sir Zeke's pride. In the morning, Zeke sat and collected the ashes of these people. After that, he told his subordinates to move on. They arrived at a beautiful place. There were columns and stained glass windows around a large tree. Miss Lubella was coming out of her room. She looked up to meet Sir Vague. The man asked the girl if her prayers had gone well, and she agreed. She asked what was going on. Wei told her that a good friend of theirs had visited them. Lubella didn't even immediately understand which friend they were talking about. Zeke sat at the table near the tree with his subordinates. They drank tea and discussed the gracefulness of the place. Sir Zeke's connections were indeed extensive. Vague and Miss Lubella entered the room. The boys stood up from their seats. It had been so long since they had seen them. The girl asked how the boys were doing and if everything was okay. Wig was very glad to see Zeke in full health. Zeke shook his hand and couldn't get used to the death machine's smile. Lubella told Mr. Hans that she hadn't seen him for a long time either, and also asked who it was that was next to them. Hans introduced the boy as his friend Snook, and the mole next to him, Novum. Snook bowed and said he was very pleased to meet him. While they were waiting, the boys heard news about Miss Lubella. They say that she will not be long left before receiving a second name, a sign that only holy ladies can give. There is only one minor thing left to do before the decision is finalized. Just establish the rationale. It remains to obtain consent from the Holy Lady Karuna. Zeke asked what they thought about doing something big and impressive instead of some little thing. For example, destroy the Bellid unit in the northern part of the country. Zeke told them what was going on. Vague was furious when he heard about the murder of the boy had treated so well. It was the work of the people from Bellid. There was a mark on the boy's chest, and Zeke asked if they knew what it was. It was one of the heresies the Bellids practice, a dark magic used to prevent a person from dying prematurely. Hans was surprised by the dark magic that was used to keep the man from dying. A person's life is colored by the energy of a person from Bellid. This is magic that keeps a person alive for a predetermined period of time, even if he is mortally wounded. It is usually used to keep a person alive during torture or, as Wag heard, to play with people. The man asked if there was any information about who exactly killed the child. It was a bald guy, half of whose face was covered with tattoos. Vague immediately realized that they were talking about a guy named Kalun. 3 words. Did the man really know him? He was one of the cardinals who were directly subordinate to the Holy Father of the Bellid clan. Lubella explained that the boy was famous as the one who created all sorts of horrors in this world. Wag couldn't believe that he just showed up in the village, but perhaps he was just passing by and stopped to buy provisions and have some fun along the way, as it turns out. His only victims were the poor people living on the outskirts, so there was no unrest within the village itself. Vague slammed his fist down on the table angrily. It was very strange that there were quite a lot of monsters living in the mountains around the village. Even orcs had made a refuge there. Wag sensed that it wasn't all that simple. If they were going against the people of Bellid, then he and Karaviman were ready to run to any battlefield. But unfortunately, they didn't have much information about their base. Zeke knew the location of the Northern Division, as well as the location of another one. Vague jumped up from his seat, because he was very happy about the benefits of Lady Lubella's relationship with Sir Zeke. Lady Lubella asked how they would know if this information was reliable, since it was not easy to obtain information about Bellid. Zeke found out about it by accident, or rather before his return. The girl admired Zeke, because he knew so much, even about the runes drawn during the incident in Porty. Those runes are the same ones she drew before Zeke's rebirth. Vague suggested heading to the northern branch first to check out the location. Judging by the fact that that place is their first destination, then the priority will be to deal with Trislova. The man asked if Zeke's goal was revenge. He replied that because of Trislov, he didn't even hear the boy's name. The boys were driving through the desert and saw stones that were arranged in the shape of an arch. Vague, sitting on his horse, looked at this and was surprised at how full the world really was of wonders. He didn't even think that a place like this existed. He was sure that he had seen enough of the world, but now, looking at this landscape, he realizes how arrogant he was. To think that he thought to measure the world created by the goddess by his own standards. Do those who serve the goddess really have such feelings? Vague told Zeke that he would feel the same way as he did if he believed in Saint Karuna. Karuviman's doors would forever be open to Zeke, but he refused. Could this really be where the northern division of the Belids was located? Wag heard that because Belu, whom the Belids believe in, is the god of water. And where they build their temples, there must be water. But all around them was desert and complete drought. Zeke understood how it looked at first glance, but it was precisely because of this prejudice that people still could not find these guys. Maybe this does make sense. Zeke started running faster. They only had a little bit left to go. They stopped at the quarry and got off their horses. Looking around, Zeke pointed to a large hole and said that this must be the entrance. With a lamp, they walked through the dark cave. Inside there was an underground lake of incredible proportions. Now it was clear why the man still couldn't find the guys from Belid. Suddenly, they saw a bright red beam in the distance and hid behind the rocks. After peeking out a little to look around, they saw a building on the water in the distance. Above the entrance hung the seal of the Belid sign. Zeke asked the man if he could trust him now. Vague took the boy by the hand and said that he would prepare the best troops of Karuviman. They sat in the palace at a long table, in the middle of which sat a man. He said he was very glad to meet you. It was Father Karuvimana. Zeke, during his great reign, did not know that he would come so close to the zombie creator he was fighting. Staying behind, he healed his subordinates and even provided support in the attack, and the knights really did not lag behind. That day, Zeke almost died. He never expected that he would one day be in a meeting with the Holy Father Karuvimana, which is more difficult than meeting the emperor of the country. The Holy Father turned to the boy. He, as a representative of Karuviman, wanted to express his deep gratitude for telling them about the Belid hideout. Zeke only extended a helping hand because he wanted to do something. The Holy Father heard that he wanted revenge. Was he thinking of taking part in the battle? Of course it was. Only while they were attacking the temple, he planned to infiltrate it. The Holy Father asked if this was to deal with the man who killed the boy. Zeke planned to torture him properly. These words greatly shocked his charges. It sounded very frightening. The man was about to reach old age, and his heart would not be able to withstand it. But the man understood everything, because Kolun Trislova was so disgusting that it made my teeth ache. However, Kolun is too strong. There were speculations that he was endowed with the same level of power as the high-ranking fighters of the Karuviman squads. The Holy Father was worried whether everything would be okay. Zeke assured them that he would not interfere with them and would do all his plans himself. The man noticed that the guy had not changed his mind, and that was very good. This operation will be carried out in complete secrecy, and it is impossible for the saboteurs to find out about their plans and escape. Therefore, for safety's sake, it would be better for the three of them to remain here in the temple until the departure, and the Holy Father would be extremely grateful if they did so. Zik asked the Holy Father if he could listen to one of his requests. The guy would like to receive the title of Honorary Knight. These words greatly surprised Lady Lubella and Survey. The Holy Father asked why he wanted this. There was no particular reason for this. It was just that if he was given the same rights as the elite knights, Trislova would be even more angry. After the conversation, Vague spoke with the Holy Father. This guy is even more unique than one could imagine. His character may be strange, but he does his job just fine. Deus. If he became an honorary knight, he certainly wouldn't be ashamed of him. The Holy Father decided to immediately grant him the title of elite knight. He also added that among the elite knights, there is one who is active and strong in skills, like Sir Zeke. If possible, Father would like to send this man on a mission with them. This elite knight's name was Glenzanard. Lady Lubella immediately understood which knight was being spoken of. But was there something wrong because the girl was not happy with these words? She explained that every time he sees her, he keeps asking her if she has any concerns, although she always says no. Vega found it funny that Lord Zanard was showing interest in Lady Lubella, but she was someone who served Karuna and had no intention of starting a relationship or getting married. In any case, Vague thought that he wouldn't be able to participate in this war since Zanard had gone somewhere else as support, so it was difficult to contact him. The girl's face showed sadness and confusion. There was a feeling that she felt out of place. Vague asked the lady if he should exchange a few words with Lord Zanard if she was uncomfortable, but she replied that everything was fine. She didn't think it was all because he was showing interest in her. She didn't know what exactly it was, but it seemed like something else. The girl thought for a couple of seconds. She felt like he was testing her. Finally, the squad headed to the unit. They rode on horseback, led by Vague. The girls sitting on the cart were reading prayers. Vague extended his hand to signal the others to stop. The detachment arrived at the entrance to the cave. It was finally time to begin my operation. Beled's on trial. Zeke stood up from his horse and said that he would go first. This means that he hasn't changed his mind about getting into the temple first, because they had already agreed on everything. Miss Lubella was worried about the boy and didn't want him to go first. Zeke reassured her that even if he was caught, he had almost no information. But the girl said that it was not what he thought. Zeke was sure that the Beleds wouldn't catch him, and nothing like that would happen. The guy had a request for Hans and Snoke. They were trained to protect themselves, so they shouldn't die. And even if they die, there's nothing that can be done about it. Zeke was the first to jump into the hole to begin the operation. Lubella wasn't sure and asked if he would be okay. Vague replied that for now it would be best to trust Sir Zeke. Now it was time for them to follow him in. A state of emergency was declared inside the building. The Beledus were informed that Karaviman was on the other side of the lake, and all the people inside ran outside. Vague gave orders to defend while the Beleds crossed the river and also to attack. The Beleds wanted to stop these Karuviman heretics as soon as possible. But one of the guys stood there unceremoniously and did nothing. Suddenly, someone grabbed his head from behind. Zeke, without much effort, turned off this guy. He noticed that nothing had changed here since then. Zeke was worried that the layout would change from what it was before he was reborn, but it remained exactly the same. Since Zeke was alone, he managed to swim through unnoticed, but he hoped that the guys from Karaviman would manage on their own. He didn't want to think about unnecessary things and needed to concentrate on what he had to do. Zeke approached the prayer room, and since this was a temple, it was here that something of the most importance would be. Opening the doors, the guy saw a pyramid in front of him with symbols written on it, and mana was emanating from it. If what he thinks is here, then this Trislova will run here first because for him, it will be a higher priority than stopping Karuviman. In that case, Zeke was going to wait for his victim. Outside the building, there were bloody battles and loud explosions. The knights attacked the Beleds with swords. The Beled man reported that the Karaviman were crossing the lake. Trislov asked one of the men how many there were in the detachment, and he replied that there were more than 1,000. If there were about 1,000, then there are now the same number of Beled followers here. But the problem was that they were all either knights or high-ranking individuals. Trislov hit the table. He didn't understand how they even knew about this place. This was not a force this unit could handle. It was too late to call for reinforcements. Trislov ordered the Tremble brothers to withdraw their troops and prevent Karuviman's men from crossing the lake. Another man told everyone to take their positions and hold Karuviman so that they would not cross the lake. Tislov started to run because he needed to sort this out first. Once he figures it out, he can ask Belu for his blessing to win. When the boy approached the prayer room, he saw blood everywhere inside and Zeke sitting in the middle of the stairs. But what he wanted to take was not in the room. Trislov got angry because he immediately thought that this guy had stolen him. Zeke was the one who had a bad feeling about him. Mr. Zeke asked the boy if he was a Kolin Trislova, cardinal of the Beled clan. The guy asked if he was the man who killed the boy. Trislov was furious because this kid had come here on a whim and was talking nonsense. Was he supposed to remember every little thing he did? The cardinal's brothers came to his aid and he told them to deal with this guy. But Zeke would like to hear the reason first. After all, wasn't he the one who killed people in the slums and tortured a child at the same time? Now Trislov understood which boy Zeke was talking about, and he agreed that it was he who killed him. He came to the village to buy provisions, and their paths crossed. And then the cardinal decided that he would kill everyone. And the murder of the little one's family and his neighbors is nothing more than a bonus. But if you look for the real reason, then it was all because of that boy. Because everyone died because of him. That they died at the hand of Trislov. At the hand of the one who carries within himself the honor of Belu and controls this world. So let him consider that those residents were honored. Zeke asked if that was why he put all the blame on the little one. The guy wanted to finally teach him something called responsibility. They had no more time to delay. The cardinal asked how Karuviman's people knew about this place. It was Zeke who showed Karuviman the way to their temple to finish off Trislov. The cardinal laughed. Because what could this boy do to finish him off? Zeke really did care about the boy that Trislov killed. He couldn't believe that all this fuss was caused by this little kid. He himself said that he killed him and the other people only because of him. Then these two would not have met if Zeke, like a mouse, sat quietly in a dark place. Zeke promised that today this ruined temple with a fish head would completely disappear. All this horror today will be due to Colin 3 words. The cardinal became very angry and activated his magic. He directed a high-pressure stream of water at Zeke. His strength was enormous, and Zeke could die from one blow. Somehow, Zeke found himself hanging on the wall, holding onto the horns of the animal's head. Zeke would have understood if Trislov had been the one who taught the boy what responsibility was. But will this fish head of Bella teach them all that there is no need to take responsibility at all? Trislov ordered him to die, and a furious stream of water appeared behind him. He was so strong that he demolished everyone and everything in his path. Now Zeke was holding onto the window frame and looking at everyone with a smile. Trislov shouted to his subordinates. Were they really not going to fight? Several sharp knives towards Zeke, but with the help of his sword, the guy repelled each of them. They all fell down in front of the knights. Zeke showed that very pyramid and asked what would happen if he accidentally touched it. But how dare he know anything about this thing? It was an artifact that controlled monsters. It was called the vengeful spirit of the pyramid. The vengeful spirit itself is a hanged man. And to complement it, negative emotions emanating from an innocent soul are needed. Before Zeke's revival, the Bellids used a brutal method of extracting these emotions to complete the artifact, just like the torture the little one experienced that day. So maybe he tortured the boy just so that the artifact would become complete. The frequent appearance of monsters in the village also happened because of the vengeful spirit of the pyramid, which brought Trislov with him, because the monsters instinctively followed him. Now Trislov knew how much Zeke knew about this, so if something went wrong, he would immediately break what they protected so strongly. The vengeful spirit of the pyramid will not break so easily, which cannot be said about Zeke's body. So the guy was going to kill him in the most brutal way possible. A new wave again rushed towards the place where Zeke was hanging, but he slipped under it, thereby dodging it. Trislov laughed as he watched the boy run away. Zeke will still be able to deal with everyone else, but he won't be able to defeat Trislov in his current state. The difference in their strength is too obvious, so insisting on a one-on-one duel is somehow stupid, so they first think about avoiding it. Where was this little rat going to run away to? To avoid the attacks, Zeke tried to crawl through, holding onto the stones of the wall. Inside the hole that was in the wall, something unusual was visible in the distance. Now the mouse will try to escape into the hole. Sitting on high, he waved at the knights and Trislov, mocking them. Underground prison in the northern division of Belid. Zeke walked through the dark corridors, waving his keys. He addressed the prisoners, asking if they wanted revenge. Meanwhile, the knights of the two worlds fought each other. Belida's boys shouted that they urgently needed to stop Karuvimen and prevent them from advancing further towards the temple. Suddenly, water started pouring from above outside. It was the power of Vega who tried to stop the opponents. People prayed and asked Saint Karuna to protect their faithful servant. The man had great faith in Saint Karuna. One of the guards approached him and reported that all the soldiers they had sent to the Belids had been attacked. Vega seemed to be overcome by a new force. He immediately began to protect his people and destroy these dirty idiots. There was a big explosion that seemed like it would destroy everything. But all these attempts were in vain. The shield was stronger than Vega thought. He didn't believe that the barrier would reflect even his strongest blow. The guards said they had just destroyed a wall of Belid troops near the lake. This was their chance to set up the crossing equipment they had prepared. They had to finish this before the Belids came flooding back. The knights began to hammer huge nails into the ground to set up the rafts. Finally, everything was ready and the structure held securely. The brave soldiers went to meet the enemies. Belid soldiers saw the Karuvimanas crossing the river. The rest of the men would cover them from behind. One of them ordered them to cross the bridge that these fanatics had erected. The shield's strength seemed to have become even stronger. It was very dangerous for Lady Lubella. The girl asked Saint Karuna to give strength and blessings to her faithful servants. Vague came to the aid of the knights. By activating his magic, he also wanted to fight for his brothers. Beams of magic were directed at them. They injured the skin of people without protection. There was a protective barrier of Belu's vile energy above the temple. If Vague attracted all of her to himself, then the other knights would not be distracted by her, and she still had no effect on the man. Even if he just stood there, it would more than help their squad. Right now, they were all at a disadvantage. However, if the shield fell and they were able to damage the main military camp, then the advantage would shift to their side. Mr. Wade thought about how Zeke was feeling now. He had great faith and hope that Zeke would be able to break the shield. The people of Belid ran to find the guy who stole the vengeful spirit of the pyramid. Trislov ordered them to find and take the shrine. The knights searched everywhere, but he was nowhere to be seen. Trislov was very tense and angry. It seems that Zeke found out about a secret tunnel that even they didn't know about. The knights assumed that he was moving around, avoiding their sight, so they could not find him. Out of anger, Trislav kicked the guard. After all, he had already told him that Zeke was carrying around the vengeful spirit of the pyramid. The guard apologized and said that he would check everything again, but then he immediately ran off and checked everything again. Trislav needed to think for a while. That guy had definitely told him that he had brought Karuvaman here to take revenge on him. Then it turns out that he must help them in the battle. Judging by the reaction to the vengeful spirit of the pyramid, Trislav did not think that he had come for the relic from the very beginning. Well then, what was he doing in the temple anyway? It suddenly dawned on him that he had done it for the shield. The Belids gathered around the statue of Bel, giving all their dark energy to him. Zeke walked in. He didn't expect to see knights here who already wanted to take him. Behind Zeke stood the mighty Trislav, who had gathered dark energy in his hands. The guy was wounded and sat there, not believing in his victory. Trislav ordered the guards to seize him. The wound was fatal, so he would not be able to escape far. Trislav also reminded the guards about the shrine, and as soon as they caught him, they should immediately take it away. People continued to give their energy to the Bel statue. Then in the dungeon, Zeke told the people he would give them a chance. These were the people who were supposed to be sacrifices to that damn Bel. This was a chance to get revenge on them. Now these people made their way into the room where the prayer was taking place and, sneaking up from behind, they began the massacre. Trislav walked majestically down the corridor, guarded. They still managed to find the wounded Zeke. The guy said that Zeke really did run away like a rat, but now his life would be over. Suddenly, the ceiling of the temple began to collapse and shake. Zeke realized what was happening and smiled. Outside, there was a confrontation between the knights of Belid and Karuviman. Hans also tried to help them, and he deftly managed to dodge the blows. He noticed a vulnerable spot on the knight that was not covered. A moment later, Hans wounded his side. The guy's body moved almost on its own. Zeke's training was insanely effective. One of the knights ordered the others to quickly go to where the active fighting was taking place and stop Karuviman. Rocks and stones appeared from underground in front of the guards. They couldn't understand how this could happen. This was the ability of Hans and the Mole Novum. As they became enraged, if the path is destroyed, they will be able to take control of everything. But then the risk of the cave collapsing was very high, and Snoke would definitely get it from Zeke. The boys noticed something unusual behind them. The shield began to gradually dissolve. Wig immediately realized that Zeke had succeeded and the plan had worked. Now was the time to destroy everything so that the shield could not be restored. Vague sent the mages under his wing and ordered them to destroy their lair. The magicians recited spells and asked Saint Karuna to take measures of sacred punishment against her enemies. The temple was attacked by water magic, which flowed through the walls and ceilings. Trislav did not understand why the temple was shaking on its own. Zeke replied that it was nothing special. The shield protecting this building had fallen, so all attacks were coming directly. Trislav could not believe his words. It was just a decoy by Zeke because his guys needed time to take down the shield. Trislav asked if there was anyone else who had gotten in here, but Zeke was alone, although there were also people here who were on his side. He told about those guys who were imprisoned in the dungeon, those he caught as sacrifices. The Trislav brothers, who stood to protect the shield, died at the hands of these victims. If he didn't believe it, Zeke told him to catch up with him and see everything with his own eyes. This guy said that he couldn't run away anywhere and started gathering dark magic in his hands. Luckily, Zeke dodged it, and it left a huge crater on the wall. These magnificent abilities were breathtaking. Trislav sent his wards in pursuit of him. He wanted to see how much longer the guy could dodge his attacks. Zeke almost managed to run to the end of the corridor to the doors. One after another, the blows crashed against the walls and the floor. The boy entered the ritual room, and Trislav told only the highest-ranking knights to follow him. The rest must guard the entrance so that he cannot escape. Trislav already felt the taste of sweet victory. But when he entered inside, he saw only the bodies of people around the statue of Belu. The guy couldn't believe his eyes. Zeke asked the great Cardinal Bella how he liked this spectacle. Trislav asked where those were who had arranged all this here, and he replied that they had already left through the secret passage that he had shown them. But what was he trying to achieve? Did the Cardinal still not understand why he was doing this? Maybe then he should ask the one who is watching all this, namely this fish head. Trislav was angered by such an appeal to the Great Bell. Zeke raised his hands and began to act out a scene, thereby mocking the Belids. He asked the statue because of whom all this horror was. Before he could blink, Zeke seemed to have vanished. The statue of Belu said that it was all because of Cardinal Belid, because of Colin 3 words. He killed a boy in one of the villages, and so one young man came to take revenge. And as a result, such a terrible tragedy occurred. Zeke asked with a grin if he heard what his great Belu was saying. Did this misfortune really happen because of what he said? According to Belu, it was all because of Trislav. Meanwhile, the Knights of Karuviman had already made their way inside the temple. They were given the order to search the entire building and eliminate all the Belids. Zeke asked Trislav if he really thought he could handle it if Belgiveg, also known as the Butcher of the Belids, was about to enter the temple, and if he attacked Zeke right there, he would fly away with the fish head. Trislav was furious. He thought that he was beyond Zeke's reach. The guy directed magical lasers to destroy. It was very brave, because Zeke managed to dodge, but the statue of Belu was shattered into pieces. Trislav turned to the guards and said that he would take responsibility for the crime committed against Belu, and that all they needed to think about now was how to kill this boy. The guards accepted his command and were ready to carry it out. Now the battle with time will begin. Zeke needed to hold out until Karaviman's squad arrived. Zeke was attacked with magic balls from all sides. He tried his best to beat off each one. One of the knives was redirected towards Belid's guard. It pierced his chest and he fell. Seeing this, Trislav raised a stream of water from underground, wishing death to Zeke. Zeke jumped over these water blows time and time again. Eventually, Zeke found himself at a dead end, and the only way out was through the windows above. This was the Belid's chance to grab the guy. Trislav ordered the guards to finish with this impudent fellow as quickly as possible, to tear him into pieces and take away the spirit of the pyramid. Suddenly, someone appeared behind him to help Zeke. The energy that filled the room overwhelmed every guard. It was Miss Lubella and Wag, the death machine. Zeke was glad to see them all right. They apologized for being a little late. Lubella noticed something unusual about Sir Zeke. He explained to the girl that this was the shrine of the Belids, the vengeful spirit of the pyramid. If it was destroyed, then absolutely all monsters could be taken under control. Lubella asked why the gentleman was carrying this with him, since it needed to be broken right away. The boy agreed because it was a good idea. He threw the shrine on the floor, threatening to smash it right away with his sword. Trislav could not look at this spectacle and was very worried about the pyramid. He ordered to stop them quickly. The guards immediately rushed to attack in an attempt to take the shrine. Vag immediately appeared in front of them and defeated them with one swing. Trislav stood in shock at his skills. Zeke smiled at the cardinal. He pronounced the phrase, syllable by syllable, "It's all because of you." Finally, the guy stuck the sword into the pyramid spirit. Trislav stood in horror and could not believe what was happening. All that was left of the shrine was smoke, dissolving into the air. Vag cut off Trislav's left arm as punishment for what he had done. The Belids wanted to protect the cardinal as best they could, but they failed. The guy was already on his knees, awaiting imminent death. Vag appealed to Cardinal Belidov Kolunu Trislovu and told him to bring the verdict of Lady Karuna. A second later, Trislav exploded, and the room was blinded by a bright light. Lady Lubella stood in horror as she watched this. She was worried about Sir Vag and asked if everything was okay. There was only a small hole left by the explosion. At this crucial moment, he opened a passage and slipped away. There's nothing to be done. If they join forces and check the temple grounds, they'll be able to find it. The girl opened her eyes and saw something in front of her that surprised her. There were traces of explosions on the walls, but Zeke was not with them. Trislav walked along the canyon. He thought that he was lucky and no one knew about this secret passage. He couldn't believe that the northern unit would go to waste like this. And on top of all this, to lose the vengeful spirit of the pyramid. He remembered Zeke with deep hatred. Trislav punched the canyon walls in anger. He definitely had to kill him. Not even a simple death, but torture that is much more terrible. But he was late. And looking up, the boy saw Sir Zeke. Zeke was already missing the cardinal to death. Trislav couldn't believe that the guy knew about this secret place. But why was he so surprised? A second later, Zeke was already standing at the bottom of the canyon. The guy also knew about some secret passage in the temple, which even the cardinal was not aware of. Trislav, having gathered a dark aura, rushed to run towards the guy. Zeke stopped his blow with ease. He even struck back, which sent the guy flying back. This caused the cardinal to cough, spitting out blood. It was not a pleasant sight. It was so disgusting, I could have died. Trislav said that even if he dies, he will do so with pride, as a believer in the god of the Belids. He promised to haunt Zeke in the afterlife, but Zeke didn't seem to be planning to kill him. Zeke had the goal of hurting him, and if you kill him, you won't feel pain. And that was already some kind of mercy, so instead, he suggested playing a game. Before all the grains of sand fall into this hourglass, you need to get to the exit of the canyon without falling into the traps that Zeke has set here. If Trislav copes, he will let him go. At first glance, very easy. The cardinal could not believe it, expecting some kind of trick. Without giving him time to think, the guy turned over the hourglass. He immediately started running, holding on to the place from which blood was oozing. After a little while, Trislov ran to the first trap. Its difficulty level was easy. There were sharp iron rods lying on the floor. Trislov thought about what an idiot the guy was to make the trap so simple. But a second later, his foot stepped on one of them and pierced it right through. The scream echoed throughout the canyon. He continued walking, limping on his sore leg. This time he was sure that he would not get caught. The second trap had a peculiarity. It could be avoided if you simply looked under your feet. It was another failure. A boulder tied to ropes flew into the cardinal's face. He cursed that damn Zeke, and he stood at the top and laughed at his failures. Trislov constantly thought about the hourglass and whether he would make it in time. This time, too, he was confident that he would not fall into the trap. The guy was completely doused with water from head to toe. All his clothes were wet and disgusting. Zeke flew up to him from behind. While the guy stood there in bewilderment, Zeke tripped him. His head wasn't raw, he was bald. Zeke's final trap. It was already dark outside and finally he reached the exit. Zeke was holding an hourglass in his hands. There was only a little bit left until their end, but he passed the test. Trislov shouted with joy because he knew he had won. Zeke threw the watch aside and reported the victory without much joy. So he plunged his sword into the cardinal's chest. This should have been put to rest a long time ago. Trislov's mouth from such torture. Now all his hopes for life were gone. Who would even believe Zeke? He lies so well. This was followed by a kick to finish him off. Now it's time to cleanse a little the soul of the poor fellow who is going to heaven. Zeke extended his blessing to Karuna, whom they hated so much, on her final journey. The boy screamed in horror when he saw Karuna's blessing in front of him. Zeke hoped to atone for his guilt for killing the boy, his family, and the villagers. Holding the blessing, Zeke recited a prayer from the book. May his path up to Lady Karuna be illuminated. May the sacred light cover him, opening the way and leading him to her. Trislov told him to shut up, but he pressed his foot on his shoulder. Let all the worries and anxieties that surrounded him disappear from now on, and let his faithful service follow the light and rise with it. Opening his eyes, Trislov saw a white space around him. Could this really be death? Looking to the side, he saw something that was emitting dark energy. The guy smiled and realized that Bella was here. He believed that the great Bellu was here to take him back. He knew his choice was not a mistake, but it was far from Bellu. This monster stood above him. It had an extremely long neck and all the other limbs, and its legs were like chicken feet. He shouted and reproached Trislov for all his sins and what had happened. In the real world, he finally died. Zeke turned his head and glanced. He looked at the boy's collected ashes and said that this is what sophisticated revenge looks like. So, coming closer, Zeke took this jar and said that now they need to go to some good place. The next day, the temple was blown up. Zeke and the Karuvimans destroyed the building of the northern division of the Belids. Vague, who saw Trislov's body, wanted to hang his head for everyone to see in front of Karuna's temple. But Zeke had his own plans to prevent the Belids from performing a funeral rite in the depths of the sea with this body. And then Vague retreated, allowing his plan to take place. The boys and all the remaining guards were already riding back to the palace. Hans asked if they should accompany Karuviman for so long. But Zeke didn't see a problem with this because it was on their way anyway. Where to spend the night, what to eat. They also arrange everything. But, by the way, in order to destroy just one northern division, it was even necessary to borrow the power of Karuviman. Someone called Sir Wag. It was Mr. Twain. Wag was very glad to see him and greeted him. Twain, by order of the Holy Father, was to help Sir Wag bring in their allied troops, but it seems he was much too late. He heard that they had destroyed the northern division of the Belids. Opening his eyes, Zeke saw something that surprised him greatly. On Twain's armor was a crest he had seen before. In his past life, this man told the Demon King that he hoped that in his next life, Zeke would become someone who does good. That man was the blue-eyed, blonde Glenn Zenard. By nightfall, the boys arrived at the camp, where there were a large number of tents. They were celebrating the victory over the destruction of the Temple of the Northern Division. There were many different dishes on the table. Karuvaman's lately, so he was in a good mood. Besides this, they had with them 2 knights who could be trusted. How come these 2 haven't gotten tired of wagging their tongues so much? Zeke didn't think they would meet again here like this. The blonde said he was very pleased to meet him and introduced himself as Glenn Zenard. Zeke clearly suspected something about him and looked at him with caution. He introduced himself as Zeke, but even though they were meeting for the first time, the guy wanted to ask him something. He replied that he could ask as many questions as he wanted. Zeke said the phrase, I hope in your next life you become someone who does good." He asked Zenard what he thought about these words. The boy didn't quite understand what was meant here. He also wanted to know why Zeke asked such a question. Zeke's face clearly showed hostility. This made Zenard nervous. Everyone at the table noticed the tense atmosphere. Suddenly, she changed, and Zeke started laughing. He said that it was nothing special, and it was a quote from a novel about a hero. All he wanted to say was that as soon as he looked at Zenard, he saw a hero in him. Twain was delighted, and said that this was true, because whoever looked at him would see a real hero in him. Zenard felt awkward because they were overpraising him, and there were many knights who were superior to him. Lady Lubella felt that Sir Zenard had achieved a lot in Karuviman and could be compared to him, but she thought that Sir Zeke could be called a fine hero, although he doesn't look like a hero, of course. Apparently, the girl has already forgotten about her worries about judging people by their appearance. Zenard looked at the couple with displeasure. He suddenly stopped their dialogue and apologized for interrupting. Zenard suddenly felt that the lady who was about to become a saint was going too far in her words. Shouldn't she be more careful in this regard after all? She was the face of Karuviman. The girl immediately apologized for such words. Twain said that everything was fine and she shouldn't worry. No matter how much of a saint she is, it is still not forbidden to make fun of friends. Although it is so strongly felt that Mrs. Lubella has changed lately, the reputation of those around her has become even better because of it. It seems that Zenard didn't quite understand correctly, and that was his mistake. Perhaps if Miss Lubella had been left alone, she would not have been able to change so much. It was all thanks to Sir Zeke, who guided her. The decisive moment was then in Porty, and Zeke himself had a chance to change. He did not expect that he would also help Lubella. Zenard became interested and asked to tell more about this chance. Just like in that novel, there was a man who told him to live a kinder life. Because of his words, Zeke did something kind for the first time. He was such a man that his whole body was permeated with a sense of justice. He personally didn't see him because Zeke was particularly unlucky. But Zeke wanted to tell him something when they met. He will try to live according to his good advice, and suddenly this life doesn't seem so bad to him. Zeke asked Zenard if he had received his answer. Late at night, 2 nights passed by a fire. Finally, Zeke went to bed to get a good rest. He had been very tired for these days. Looking at the ceiling, he thought about Glenn Zenard. At first, Zeke didn't think he was reborn. He decided to just see if he understood the meaning of the phrase or not. Zeke thought that if the fate-warping key was the reason for his return, then there was a possibility that Glenn Zenard had been reborn as well. Isn't the key that distorts fate originally connected to reincarnation? Or else he simply pretends not to have returned. But now it had nothing to do with Zeke. Whether Glenn Zenard had been reincarnated or not, the boy had no intention of getting involved in this any further. He just wanted to give him a sign that he was living by his advice. And he thinks that everything is even great, that life is quite good. So in this life, Zeke Mora and Glenn Zenard's connection ends right here. Meanwhile, Zenard was still awake and sitting in his tent. He sat in front of the lit candle and thought about Zeke. Zenard still couldn't figure out who he was. He looked and behaved the opposite of the Zeke he remembered. But he was sure of one thing. It was not Zeke Moore, the Demon Lord. And also not Zeke Fortress, successor of Mark Count. Could this be brave Zeke? But no, it wasn't like that. It couldn't be that Zenard didn't feel the atmosphere of justice that emanated from Brave. Then there is only one thing left, Chameleon. Zenard tormented himself with thoughts about why he came now, because this idiot hadn't changed a bit. If he decides to do what he wants, it will be extremely dangerous. But Zenard is someone who has lived hundreds or thousands of years longer than others and can learn everything himself. Even if Zeke's appearance changes due to circumstances, his omniscient power of destruction remains with him. Zeke will become strong and at some point even become a threat to him. Would it be better to kill him now? The first thing we need to do is find out why he became a chameleon. We still need to find out if even an innocent child could somehow become a chameleon. I told you there was something else that made Zeke change. Zenard tormented himself with questions about what the hell could have done such a thing. There are too many chameleons in this reincarnation of his. He was going to come up with a serious plan and establish surveillance on Zeke. Further measures will be taken to suppress the forces of the Bellids. Zenard remembered the words that Zeke had spoken to him at the table. It suddenly dawned on him, and he didn't understand why the guy asked him such a question. In the morning, the boys were already heading off on their journey. Hans and Snook took on huge backpacks with things. Miss Lubella and Wag watched them go. The girl thought that it would be better for them to rest a little more before the journey, but she hoped that they would be able to meet again. Zeke asked the guys if they had taken everything, and they agreed. But where will they go this time? First, you need to go in search of the sword, a symbol of the power of the demon lord Zikmora. It was a magical sword called Tronium. Their next stop was the tourist town of Biolawan. This city could amaze everyone with its beauty. People in the square sang songs and danced. The unknown person approached the bench and watched as the food was prepared. It was that same incredibly beautiful girl from the forest who helped finish off Miss Bargot. But, unfortunately, after feeling her pockets, she realized that she had absolutely no money. Suddenly, someone came up to her from behind and put his hand on her head. The man pulled her hood off, and her snow-white long hair fluttered in the wind. It was Sir Zeke, a meeting she certainly didn't expect. He greeted her and said how long it had been since they had seen each other. The girl stood there in bewilderment and just looked at the guy. Biolawan is a small but famous tourist town with many attractions. Zeke told his charges that they had one day. Right now, their free time would begin. Until this hour tomorrow, they could have as much fun as they wanted. The boys immediately ran off joyfully wherever their eyes looked. Zeke was thinking about what he could eat now. He took a fancy to the man who was standing near the bench. He bought this girl a skewer with vegetables and meat to treat her to. She was cautious and didn't understand what was happening. The guy was wolfing down the vegetables. Has he forgotten what happened between them back then? Zeke joked that there was passionate love between them at that time. The girl was offended by the joke and left him. She told the guy to speak faster, what he needed. He had already said earlier and offered to go on a date. Did he really want her to believe his words when she clearly thought he had other goals? He also had a few questions for her. She didn't want to tell him anything, but then Zeke suggested that they just go on a date and he would try to find out everything himself while spending time with her. Did the guy really expect her consent? He had no idea, but he thought he knew what she was thinking about right now. He handed her a couple more skewers to snack on. She clearly really wanted to eat those kebabs. Eventually, the two of them found themselves in a park near a fountain. The girl really did eat a lot. Apparently, she was very hungry. If there had been something else instead of shashlik, Zeke would have spent all his money. She didn't understand why the guy was staring at her like that. He asked her what her name was. Perhaps it was too early to ask about the name, but the girl gave her answer. Her name is Layla. A slight wind blew and her hair fluttered beautifully. She repeated again that her name was Layla. Festive balloons were flying all over the city. The guys were walking through the market, and the girl looked at a stall that sold drinks. The guy treated her to coffee, and she drank the whole glass in one gulp. He took her hand and led her somewhere. The boutique windows were filled with magnificent fluffy dresses. In the store, the girl tried on all sorts of outfits. The first one was cute but modest, which was not very to the girl's liking. The salesman said that she was the most beautiful girl he had ever seen. The second outfit had a large light hat and a fluffy dress with sleeves. The girl didn't like anything and she got angry every time. After the walk, they sat in the establishment. Zeke said that she should have picked out clothes when he actually proposed this date, so a boring robe like that wouldn't be quite right. The girl asked if that was why he played with people like dolls. Whatever she did, it suited her, and he wanted her to try many different things. So let her blame only her beautiful appearance. The waiter brought them a large mug of beer. Zeke handed one of them to the girl and offered her a drink to refresh herself. She coughed as she took her first sip. The guy made sure she drank everything, and then said that he had added poison to it. It was so witty, and the beer with a drop of poison was so refreshing. Their stern gazes met. Zeke kept wondering who the hell she was. This was followed by a counter question. Who is he? The girl asked if he was really Zeke. He couldn't remember changing his first name, but perhaps his last name. Zeke asked if she meant the last name more. The girl replied that if he was going to change his last name, she thought the last name Bravey would sound good. Suddenly, some kind of commotion and apparently a fight began in the establishment. A voice said that they were just the two of them talking, so why were they acting like this? This voice was very familiar to Zeke. Inside the crowd were Hans and Snock. The boys turned around and saw Sir Zeke. Hans and Snock were talking to some guys who were yelling at them to attack. Snock explained that those guys heard them talking and were looking for a fight. They didn't want to make a fuss, so they tried to ignore it, but they kept going. One of the hooligans noticed something. He looked at the girl standing behind Zeke and asked who that beauty was with him. He came closer to her and invited her to have fun with them. Snock leaned over to the gentleman and asked if this wasn't the same girl and if perhaps this guy needed to be stopped. Zeke pointed his finger near his mouth to tell him to be quiet and stay still. This guy was courting Layla. He said that they could make her have a lot of fun, but the girl hit him on the hand and pushed him away. The bully smiled and said that it wouldn't be as much fun with an easy girl anyway. She used her magic to send current through his entire body. Zeke watched them, and the two of them got it right. His friend stood up and started running at her with his fists, but her gaze could pierce anyone. Zeke stood up for her and stopped the guy's fist. He then followed up with a punch to the jaw. It was so strong that the boy was thrown back to his friend's feet. The rest of the hooligans attacked Zeke with knives and threatened that he would not remain alive. Zeke easily took down each one without much effort. At night, when the guy returned, he asked Layla how well she had fried them. The girl walked silently ahead of everyone. Layla asked why he didn't kill those people, but it was bad to ask that of a man whom she herself had told to live kindly. Was it necessary to resort to reckless violence in a virtuous life? Stopping a guy who was looking for a fight wasn't exactly reckless. Now the girl understood his perception. Layla, as always, looked beautiful in the moonlight at night. Finally, she asked if he had finished his business. The guy stopped her, grabbed her hand, and asked her to wait. Snock and Hans watched this cute couple with surprise and joy. Zeke told her that he was busy tomorrow and wouldn't be able to. But 10 days later, he suggested meeting in the same place where we had met for the first time. He didn't want to part with her like that, and moreover, didn't she want to learn something from him too? During the walk, he noticed how she was watching him all the time. Layla waved her hand and agreed, but on the condition that he would not break his promise. Zeke reflected on how close they had become in such a short time, but he still had no idea who she was. The first and most suspicious thing is that she is a high-ranking mage, but she has no money. She doesn't know something and feels out of place. But looking at the way she ordered food and treated clothes, he didn't think that she knew anything at all. In simple terms, she has knowledge but no experience. Also, considering she called him more, he's almost certain that it's from the future. Hans approached Zeke and asked if they had any special plans for tomorrow, and if not, they would like to take a stroll around the tourist attractions. Zeke replied that he would also go with them. The guys looked at him in great surprise. Zeke knows of a great tourist attraction. The next morning, they arrived at the ancient ruins of Biolovan. Hans and Snock walked and looked at everything around them. They wondered why and for whom all this was made, and it seemed to have been built a long time ago. Zeke thought about the thornium sword. In the past, it just slashed through everything and passed through, so now he wasn't sure. The first thing they had to do was get to the place he remembered. A sign hung from the ceiling. "Do not enter." Hans asked if they were allowed to go to such a place. Suddenly, they heard some strange sound. Snock pointed ahead and said he heard it coming from ahead. The entrance further was blocked. The guys assumed that there might be something behind the wall. There was definitely a secret passage there before, which led to the location of Tornium. But was there this door then too? Zeke ran his hand along the wall, trying to find some kind of lever or button. This door only responded to Sir Zeke. When the guys touched it, nothing opened or even moved a bit. Zeke wondered why the door reacted only to him. There was some energy coming from inside. There was something around him that was holding him back. What could be there? The guys went inside. The energy was quite familiar, but it was definitely not Tornium. Hans screamed in horror for Zeke to look ahead. It was the holy sword of Glen Zenard, the brave warrior of the sun. The sword itself was called Estelad. It was stuck in a special stone. But why was it here? If the sword that symbolized the demonic lord of power Zik Mora was the magical sword Tornium, that sword, symbolizing the brave sun fighter Glen Zenard, was the holy sword Estelid. Glen Zenard delivered the finishing blow to Zeke like this. But why was the sword here at all? The holy sword Estelade, unlike the dark magic sword Tornium, recognizes its owner, so if a person is unworthy of it, he will not even be able to lift it. Hans asked Sir Zeke if he knew anything about it. The guy replied that it was a holy sword, which surprised the guys a lot. Did this mean that if you pull it out, you can become a hero? Hans and Snock exchanged glances for a second. Snock asked if he could try to get it, but he was connected to Novum, so maybe he wouldn't be able to. Although this sword's standard for choosing a master isn't that tricky. Snock stood on the stone that held the holy sword. The boy tried his best to get it. Zeke watched this unceremoniously, and Hans believed in his friend. But, as he thought, nothing came of it. Mole Novum began to caress his master, and Snoke does not need any sword. Just one mole is enough for him. Hans asked Sir Zeke if he would try at least once, and he refused. After all, it was this holy sword that did not get along with Zeke. Hans didn't even want to try because he thought he wouldn't succeed either. But one try wouldn't have made anyone worse. The boys heard someone walking down the corridors and prepared to defend themselves. On the other side, there was another corridor. Could these be people searching for the Holy Sword? As soon as Zeke heard them, he realized that the footsteps belonged to trained fighters. Could this man really be Glenn Zenard? The beautiful Layla ran into the room. The guys certainly didn't expect to see her here, and apparently she didn't expect to see them either. A whole squad of people in robes ran after her. They hoped that now this girl would be like a rat in a trap. Zeke told Layla to duck immediately. The girl immediately threw herself on the floor and Zeke swung his sword. There was a large explosion in the building. As soon as the dust cleared, Layla began to cough. Zeke extended his hand to help her up. He asked if these were her friends, and she replied that these people were following her. She lowered her head, feeling a little sad. Zeke noted that she was popular since crowds were running after her. As they chatted, more and more people gathered in the room. These were the guys who caught people one by one and perverted them. Their shape was very similar. A man from their clan ordered a change of plan. He told everyone else to leave this guy in the core alive. And the rest were killed immediately, and everyone rushed to the attack. Hans defended himself against several at once. Snock immediately activated his ability. With her help, he managed to help his friend. Together they hold up well, but very soon they will feel the difference in abilities. These guys are excellent in many skills. There is little space, so it is also difficult to use Layla's larger-scale magic. Especially this level of subordinate devil. Now his skills are even higher than Zeke's. Even without a magical dark sword, it's not entirely logical to go against him now. Suddenly, one of these guys attacked Zeke from behind. Zeke's skills were weak for this level, since he found time to chat. Everyone turned around because they heard a crash. Zeke's body flew with great force into the wall. A boy from their clan told his captain that Estelide was near Zeke, but that didn't matter now. There is no way he could pull out the holy sword. The captain said to stop and sort things out here. He ordered his subordinates to kill Hans and Snoke and take the core alive, pointing at the girl, and everything that was left, including this chameleon and Estelide. Before he could finish speaking, the captain felt the energy. He couldn't believe it. This energy came from the holy sword. Then there was a blinding flash. The people from the clan fell and remained lying unconscious. The boys looked at Sir Zeke with surprised eyes. He managed to get the holy sword Estelide. Zeke himself couldn't believe that he managed to do it. He heard the words of the leader of this gang, who said that there was no way that Zeke would be able to pull out the holy sword. The guy just wanted to hit him right on the back of the head so much that he tried to pull him out. He really didn't think he'd actually get it. He didn't even dream he'd be able to use it. Layla asked why he pulled it out. Well, why did she ask? If he hadn't gotten it, they would all have died. She meant how he managed to do it in the first place. Zeke said it was a sword that could not be obtained unless one was worthy. In response, the girl could not say anything and simply remained silent. She asked if he was worthy of it. Zeke put it back into the stone. Layla asked him why he did it, and he replied that he wasn't going to use it because it didn't suit him. That is, he knew how the sword behaves in battle. It didn't matter anymore, because Zeke was going to take another sword. Did he really think of taking Tornium for himself? The girl herself had already guessed his intentions. Zeke saw Hans and Snoke and ran up to them, seeing that they had survived. If they are finished, then it is time to go, because their goal is not here. The girl confidently approached and stopped the guy. Taking him by the hand, she pulled him towards the steps. Layla pointed to Estelida's sword and told her to take it out. She repeated her request again, but he didn't want to because this one already had an owner. He had said earlier that he would live kindly, so he needed to take Estelide with him, not Tornium. It seemed that the girl was worried that Zeke would become a demon lord if he carried Tornium with him. The boy replied that even with virtue, there was no law that ordered him to take Estelade with him. Sure, Tornium was called a sword of dark magic, but it didn't literally send people straight to the devil's abyss. Layla, with her head down and still holding Zeke's hand, said that this couldn't be done. She repeated it again and told me to take Estelide with me. Suddenly, he felt pain in his arm. It was a sharp pain in the finger on which there was a mark. Something started to happen around them, and the entire room was filled with the energy of the holy sword. Hans and Snoke looked at the tornado that formed around Zeke. Zeke asked Layla if it was her doing. The girl replied that it was not magic. She suggested that perhaps the sword was trying to forcibly transport them to another location. Apparently, there is no way back. Zeke shouted to the boys that he would stay here for now. If he didn't come, they had to go back first, and they need to wait for him at the hotel. Hans began to worry because only Sir Zeke could open that door. But there was a path that Layla came by. The girl said that the road after the tunnel was blocked, so they couldn't get out. The girl opened the space with the help of magic. A gold ring flew out of it. She gave it to Hans to open the way. Gradually, Zeke and Layla began to dissolve. Hans was worried about his master and told them to be careful, but they should not be afraid for him, and they should worry about themselves. Soon, there was no one left in the place where the boys were standing. Snock asked his friend if Sir Zeke would be okay, and he replied that of course, if everything was okay. But what will they do here while they wait for Zeke? Hans glanced at the lying bodies of the assassins. He suggested to his friend to rob these guys because it seems they have a lot of money. Soon they had collected a whole mountain of gold coins, as well as a couple of flasks with some kind of liquid. Zeke must like this scope, because they found a lot of gold coins. The boys weren't sure they'd be able to get it all, so Hans suggested putting it in a magic box. Hans thought about the holy sword Estelida. He wanted to try just to get it at least once. The guy grabbed his handle with his hands and tried to get it. Snock wished his friend good luck. Suddenly they heard footsteps from the corridor. These were the same guys who attacked them earlier. Hans told Snoke to prepare himself in case something happened. People in robes ran into the room, holding a large number of knives in their hands. The boys started running, and sharp knives were flying after them. Zeke and Hans at first, in order to question them. Snock whispered to his friend what they should do, since apparently the assassins thought that they were the ones who killed their comrades. The only thing left for them to do was to fight. Hans drew his sword and began to attack, asking Snoke to protect him. These guys weren't that simple, and they managed to dodge Hans' attacks. Meanwhile, Snock defended as best he could. He collected huge pieces of stones. He then directed them all towards the assassin, hoping that he would be able to tie up at least one of them by the legs. But this man managed to repel the boulder attack with his sword, which was extremely surprising. Hans thought that the space was too closed, making it difficult for Snoke to use his power to its full potential. If this continues, the two of them will not be able to protect themselves. Because of these thoughts, the guy got distracted and got kicked. It was so strong that Hans was sent flying across the room. The assassins rushed to attack again. Hans barely managed to hold off their attacks with his sword. The attacking assassin said that he knew it was not they who killed the captain. It was impossible to continue the fight like this. The difference in their strength was too great. Hans noticed that the holy sword Estelad was near him. If he gets it, can he become like Sir Zeke? With one blow, the guy threw the attacker aside. Hans grabbed the handle in hopes of saving himself and Snoke. The assassins shouted that Estelid would never accept the level of a guy like him. Snoke was cornered and completely defenseless. Hans didn't even think he would be able to get this sword. He remembered Mr. Zick's words about being spiteful until the very end. In the evening, near the fire, he told him that he would always have time to surrender, even if he died. Whatever the case, rise up at all costs before you die, even with such a small hope, and even if it is barely glimmering. Unexpectedly for everyone, the sword let the guy take it. The assassins couldn't believe that Estelid had chosen him. Snock was very proud of his friend and looked at him with hope. Estelid's power shone through Hans' entire body. The assassins didn't want to let the guy get used to the sword and immediately rushed to kill him. Snock shouted at his friend to swing. Now Hans was ready for any attack. The people were already very close. All that was left was to take a swing. At that moment, Sir Zeke and Layla moved. This place was similar to where they had been before. The girl tried to use her magic, but teleportation didn't work here either. Now all that's left is to walk around. Zeke decided to ask what she was doing inside the ruins and what those who were pursuing her were doing. But the girl, as always, remained silent. The guy didn't like this silence. Whoever he was in her eyes, he still saved her life. Finally, she answered that she didn't know the exact reasons either. The guy felt a sharp pain in his finger again. The girl turned around to ask what happened, but she didn't see the wound on her hand and asked where it hurt. His fingers felt like they were on fire. If everything looked fine on the outside, then maybe the problem was inside, or something was stuck. It seemed like there was something on his finger. Looking closer, he saw a key that distorted fate. Meanwhile, Zeke and Hans's ceiling in the ruins began to collapse. It was all because of the holy sword Estelade. People ran out of the hall in panic. A large explosion occurred in the ruins. Soon only Hans was left in the room and dust was scattering around. Hans felt Estelad's strength. He felt like he could defeat anyone who came. At the very least, it's now very easy to counter these guys. The main thing now was to calm down. Sir Zeke had told the boy this phrase hundreds of times during the battle. Excitement is fatal. Taking a deep breath, the main thing for him now was to maintain his composure. One of the assassins didn't expect this. He didn't want to use secret tactics. But now he has to. He took out a flask of potion from his sleeve and drank it. A dark aura appeared around this guy. Snock shouted for Hans to be careful. The assassin turned into the monster that Hans saw in Osperen. The monster began to run, accelerating with great force. The guy was determined and wanted to strike. He then hit the ground, sending a blast wave across the entire room. This bright light blinded the monster. The impact was so strong that the entire room was filled with light. Hans made sure that the sphere of light was stable. The monster was still alive and rose up to take revenge. Of course, the guy won't be as good as Sir Zeke, because he would have destroyed everyone here in one fell swoop. Compared to those guys, this monster is much stronger now. But Sir Zeke is above the heavens. How can Hans become the same? The monster ran towards the guy again to attack. He had already prepared his fist and wanted to hit with all his might. Hans tried to defend himself with his sword. Shouldn't he be able to do it by now? The skills that Sir Zeke taught him at the very time when his abilities caused him to fail. The monster noticed something was wrong. The guy used more force to jump back. This monster clearly didn't like it, and he shouted that Hans was being insolent. Now was that decisive moment. Hans delivered the fatal blow, depriving his opponent of his head. The assassins could not believe that the monster was stupidly defeated. The guy also attacked the others with deft movements. The main thing in battle was to study the enemy's weaknesses, and also to hit the target when there is such an opportunity. In the end, Hans managed to defeat everyone. The bodies of fallen people lay around him. The boys were very happy about the victory and Snock ran up to him. Hans was very proud of his deed. It seemed he was worthy of the holy sword after all. Someone's hand moved, and one of the assassins asked if he really thought he had won. The boys turned around and looked at the man. He said that these two would die anyway. They will die along with the nightmares found in this city, and everything around will be destroyed to pieces. Layla asked Zeke how his fingers felt. The guy replied that everything was fine because he drank the potion. Zeke handed the girl something that looked like a blue plant. He asked if she knew what it was. Layla was definitely worried about something, but now she doesn't know. It turns out that she knew something about it before, but now she can't say for sure. Judging by her emotions, the girl wasn't joking. The thing in Zeke's hand swayed forward. Apparently, he says to go there. Zeke told the girl that the two of them would have to walk quite a long way, and he still has a lot of questions he wants to ask. He will be glad to learn even something very insignificant. Layla agreed, but warned that she might not answer everything. Then they should move forward. The boys walked straight ahead, passing by the columns. The girl asked if he had decided what he wanted to ask. If he had a rough plan in his head, then it's worth starting, but she will only answer exactly 3 questions. Where have you ever seen such a thing? Zeke wanted to ask so many questions. But what if she can't answer anything because apparently she has some kind of memory problems? Layla reassured him that anything she couldn't answer wouldn't count. Then he asked the first question about what her real name was. The girl was very surprised because she had previously said that her name was Layla. Then in the park, he thought that she had made him up in a hurry, and it turned out to be true. Or maybe her name is Core, like those guys called her, but that wasn't a name either. Zeke didn't understand how he should interpret this. It felt like the assassins calling it the Core had some other meaning. Is it possible that she wants to give up her real name, and if not, then perhaps she never had one in the first place? Since he had hit on something important, perhaps the second question would hurt her much more. The guy asked how she knew everything she had told him so far. Her answer was short. Everything she knew before, she learned from dreams. She learned from there the future of 2 people. One holds the sacred sword, the Sun Warrior, who protects the world. And another one brandishes a dark magic sword, arrogantly relating to the same world, a demonic lord of power. And she felt what they saw and felt, as if in a dream. A counter question followed. How does this dream end? The girl answered that it always ends differently. Sometimes the ruler wins, and at other times the sun fighter. Of course, there is an ending where they both die, and at some point they are surprised because a completely different future opens up before them. But in the end, their future ends in a conflict between the Sun Warrior and the demonic Lord of Power. The guy asked if there was more specific information about this particular future. Layla didn't know the details because her memory was incomplete. Zeke asked why this happened, but it seemed that his 3 questions were over. The guy thought there was one more left, because just now it was not a question. The girl didn't understand where this obsession with questions came from. Hadn't he found himself in the same situation as her? He too saw his future and received information about it. Isn't that why he's trying so hard not to become the demon lord Zeke more? Zeke realized that she had been thinking about it this whole time. Just as he thought that Layla had been reborn, the girl apparently thought that Zeke had also seen his future in a dream. Judging by her story, it all sounds very similar to their story with Glenn Zenard. Maybe if she saw many futures, it means that overall there is a lot of potential in the future. She said that there was also a demon lord defeating a fighter. What was the whole thing then? It turns out that before his rebirth, among all these countless futures, Zeke reached the very future where he died. Zeke was very angry and dissatisfied because he still had one question. Layla said he could ask it. The guy leaned closer to her face and said that this question would be about her. He asked what her favorite color was. The girl was in shock. She was counting on any other, but not this one. Zeke repeated it again. Couldn't she remember it? She replied that her favorite color was white. That's why she called herself Layla. The petals of the Layla flower are white. Now the questions were over. The girl was surprised that he would actually finish there. Zeke said it wasn't a question, just simple curiosity. He wanted to talk about what she had said. Earlier, she had said that she had seen many possible futures. Then, apparently, she now thinks that he will become the Demon Lord Zeke Moore. The girl answered briefly, no, but she cannot confirm her thoughts. Maybe he is going only along one road, and from those futures that she saw with him, or he is going along a completely new path she cannot know. But among the futures she saw, there was no one in which Zeke held Estelidi. Roughly speaking, just getting Estelidi sent him into a future she didn't see. Everything was exactly like that, so when they return, he should take Estelade and not even look towards Tornium. But Zeke didn't want to, because he didn't like him, and Layla was very angry about this. The guy asked her to wait. Looking at the thing in his hand, he realized something. From this moment on, something else begins. Some creatures were visible with silhouettes similar to people. Ladies and gentlemen gathered near the castle. On the edge of the cliff stood the assassins, looking out over the city at night. The leader said that, judging by the fact that only they had gathered, the result was unsatisfactory. Two guys got down on their knees and apologized. They said that the search party had not been able to return, and there was no contact with them. The first step of the task has failed, so they need to proceed to the second step immediately. The leader looked at the common people. They must be having a good time, not suspecting anything. The guy thought about how sad they looked. After such a hard battle, Hans and Snoke were resting at the hotel. Snoke asked if his friend was sleeping. He asked him, half asleep, what he wanted. The boy thought about Sir Zeke all the time, and worried if everything would be okay with him. But had he ever seen Zeke suffer? It was hard to even imagine. Snoke agreed, but a whole day had already passed. Hans said that their worries would not change anything. It would be better to save their strength for later, because they did not know what might happen. Sir Zeke can handle everything himself, and there is no need to worry. He also has that girl with him who has an unusual power. After thinking for a bit, Snoke realized that the guy was right. But, to be honest, besides Zeke, he also thought about those words of the guy. One of the Black Hoods said before he died that terrible nightmares would find this city. Snoke thought that he said this because he thought that he was dying unfairly, so he decided to scare them. Hans called his friend and wanted to ask him one question. If nightmares really do come to this city, then if a situation arises that threatens Hans' life, what will he do? To be honest, it's scary, but he will help people. Snoke must fulfill his duty with Novum, and he will not be able to stop people in dire situations and escape. Hans, a little offended, said that was how it should be. Now that Estelide's sword has chosen hands, he can't run. Suddenly the boys heard a loud scream and jumped out of their beds. The boys went to the window to see what was happening. Terrible monsters burst into the village and set fire to everything around. They also attacked defenseless people. Was that guy talking about these nightmares? Zeke and Layla walked forward down the corridor where something unknown began. Zeke felt some danger and took out his sword. The girl, raising her head up, saw something terrible. There was some kind of slime hanging from the ceiling. She looked very disgusting. Some strange tentacle attacked, and Zeke cut it in half. Then there was an explosion, and the guy covered his head with his hands. He didn't even understand what it was. As if he hadn't even cut anything, the girl warned him that there were more coming. It was a whole crowd of incomprehensible magical creatures. They attacked with their limbs, trying to kill strangers. There were so many of them, all at once, that Zeke managed to defeat each one. Suddenly, one of them rushed towards Layla. She began to cast a spell to protect herself. Her blows left holes in the bodies of these creatures. There was no end to them. They didn't even get a taste of the fight. Zeke asked the girl if she knew anything about them, but nothing even came to her mind. It was impossible to even understand where this tunnel led. The guy is already tired of hanging around here. They need to get back quickly. Layla asked if he was worried about his students. Zeke wasn't worried, because he was the one training them. These two have talent and will. They followed his instructions well, but both dream of stupid things which can even be a little dangerous. Zeke had said something about them at the bar. Zeke defeated the monster again. His students want to become heroes. The girl couldn't believe that guys with such dreams obeyed Zeke. The guy was sure that there was no one who knew as much about heroes as he did. Regardless, with dreams like these, they must act quickly. The beautiful tourist town was completely on fire. The little boy tried to escape from the monster. Suddenly, he tripped and fell, his eyes filled with horror. Hans came to his aid, stopping the monster's power with the holy sword Estelade. He felt justice that could not keep up with skills. Nothing dangerous will happen with such dreams. This must be the shadow base, because everything around was just swarming with them, Layla said to move out of the way. She began to read the spell in abbreviations. Everything around was filled with bright yellow light. Even Zik almost got hit, but he managed to get away. After that, there was no one left in the tunnel. Layla managed to deal with everyone. Zeke said she had hurt him on purpose, and she replied that it didn't hurt that much anyway. The plant that showed the way showed further. It seems like they're almost there, but it feels like there's something there. The boys walked forward through the now clear tunnel. In front of them, they saw a sword similar to the others, but this one seemed to be made of plants. The thing the boy was holding in his hand rose into the air and began to hover. The plant was approaching this weapon. Zeke and Layla looked on in bewilderment as the sword swallowed him. A bright green light began to emanate from it. They didn't understand what was happening, and the girl didn't see anything like this in the future. Layla suggested that perhaps he was calling his owner to him, and she should try to get him. The key that distorts fate was absorbed by this sword. Then it turns out that this sword is the main body of the key. Surprisingly, it was warm. Zeke thought that it, like the other swords, was cold. It felt as if he was holding a human hand. Suddenly, the sword allowed itself to be drawn. Zeke didn't expect this. A breeze started to blow, fluttering his clothes and hair. The aura around the guy changed color. A bucket and a small flash appeared. It was followed by a big explosion. Coming to her senses, Layla looked at what was happening. Zeke stood with a sword in his hands, which changed its aura. The guy admired it because it was extremely amazing. In the city, Hans told the boy to run away quickly. The child thanked for saving him and started running. Hans pushed the huge monster away. The boy ordered Snoke to evacuate the people outside the city gates. The knights of the city also tried to stop the attack. All sorts of monsters with weapons were advancing. Hans realized that things were going badly and it wouldn't be that easy. Soon, Snoke came running. He reported that he had evacuated everyone outside the gate. Now he needed to block the exit. The boy, with Novum's help, lifted a pile of stones. They were aimed at blocking the gate. The monsters tried to break through this wall. Now the guys need to start with the monsters that are already inside. Hans defeated everyone with his holy sword. Snoke, building rocks, pierced the monsters. The knights also did not lag behind and did everything they could. There were no more monsters inside the castle. While they were fighting back, auxiliary troops arrived, and now it is possible to stop the monsters reliably. But Hans couldn't believe that this was really all. Was this the nightmare that guy was talking about? While he was thinking, there was an explosion behind them. Everyone turned around to see what was happening. The monsters rushed to attack with renewed vigor. The auxiliary troops shouted that they needed to be stopped immediately. Suddenly, someone killed the guards, but they weren't monsters. The boys stood in horror, looking at this, as they understood that their strength was now insufficient. It was the commander of the Black Hoods. The man turned to the one holding Estelade and asked who he was. Hans looked at the hooded man with the monster fighting behind him. This guy clearly knows what kind of sword this is. As Hans thought, this one is also on the side of that squad from the ruins. The guy thought for a second. He watched as the monsters killed the guards one by one. This is what he was talking about. It really is a nightmare hell. The leader of the army immediately ordered the others to stop all this. The knights rushed to attack the hooded man, but he didn't even show that he was scared. All the knights were killed with the sword. The other guy watched this and couldn't believe that this was actually happening. It was the leader of that detachment. He killed those people with his sword. The knight looked around and saw that he was surrounded by monsters. He realized that now death was definitely awaiting him. Snoke shouted at him to quickly lie down on the ground. The knight covered his head with his hands and crouched down. Hans said to leave one monster for him and cut Estelade in half. Snoke walked up to the boy and handed him his sword. The guy also said to pull themselves together, because now every person counts. Snoke and Hans set out to meet these monsters. The knight stood in shock and watched them. The level of these guys was strong enough and they dealt with these thugs. Snoke was not far behind either, trying to use his ability as best he could. He erected a huge rock in the shape of a dragon's head. Now the knight saw hope in this city. He ordered his subordinates not to fear anything and let them remember that the soldiers were fighting side by side with them. The knights began to carry out the order, and several people at once tried to defeat the monster. They managed to bring down this huge monster. A hooded man watched the spectacle. He also watched Hans's fight. This guy gave it his all. Suddenly, Hans noticed something out of the corner of his eye. Turning around, he saw a hooded man attacking him. Hans tried to hold back his blow, and an aura of good and evil hovered around them. The assassin asked why someone like Hans would want to keep Estelita around. A vortex appeared in the ruins, which had previously teleported Zeke and Lila. They really did go back to the very beginning. Layla said that she said so that's probably true. Did she trust her wavering intuition and use higher magic to transport them to another place? But it was not magic. This sword has a special connection with this particular place, which is why it is possible to move back and forth. Zeke asked the girl how she knew about this. Everything was easy and simple, she just felt it. Zeke looked at the sword and thought about how it had called them, and then sent them here again. The guy heard something happening upstairs. Looks like someone is storming the entire city. The first thing they need to do is go out and look at the situation. Looking around, the boy saw more bodies of people. Could it be that Hans and Snoke had done this? Suddenly, Zeke realized something and turned around. Estelita's sword was not in its place. The guy immediately thought that this was the work of Hans. He could not believe that the sword had actually chosen him. Zeke called the girl and said that they needed to go quickly, get out and check everything. Looking at her face, he saw that Layla was very worried. She said that it all happened because of her. After all, it was because of her that the assassins came here to look for her. This city is being attacked to catch the girl. Zeke asked again if they started a war in the city just to find her. The guy didn't understand how they could make such a fuss just to catch one single person. Were these guys really that crazy? Apparently this girl was that important. The first thing Zeke said was that it was all because of him, and that she didn't need to think about such things. People who attack an entire city to catch one are complete idiots. First, they need to get up and check everything to see if they really came for her. Layla was sure that these were not the people they had met down here. The girl was upset that if she had come with full strength, she would have been able to fight well. Zeke reassured her and said that everything was fine, but their time was limited. But now, with such a sword, he was invulnerable. Explosions occurred in the city time and again. How Zeke missed views like this. He saw this every day when he lived as a demon lord. Suddenly, the boys met a squad. They were aiming to catch the girl. The leader of their squad said that the core's limbs could be cut off if necessary, but it had to be alive. The girl was already ready to use her magic with all her might. Zeke stood up to protect her, which surprised her. The guy walked unceremoniously towards the enemies, singing songs. The leader of the squad told his subordinates that it was permissible to kill the guy who came with her. Layla told me to leave because it was her business. But even if her mood is upbeat and confident, she should not use candles in vain. Zeke's new sword has been activated. A crowd of guys rushed to attack them. Zeke thought it would be a little warm-up before dinner. Everything around them was filled with a blue aura. The guys from the squad didn't understand what was happening. A second later, everything around them was burning. Neither Layla nor the squad members could believe that this was possible. A small crater formed in front of them. The guy was happy because he understood how it works. He didn't use any special techniques, he just poured in magic in full, but it gave him strength, so it turned out great. It's just a pity that now this can only be done a few times. The leader of the squad did not understand who this guy was in front of them. Zeke approached these guys and asked what they were doing in this city where life was going well. The man whispered what kind of relationship he had with the core and began to search for something under his robe. The man threw something on the ground, but Zeke, as if teleporting, grabbed it and crushed it. Zeke asked who the man was going to send the signal to. The guy told the man not to do useless things. Even without a signal, he will find them everywhere. The girl was shocked by Zeke's abilities. It was not a battle that would last long. The detachment decided to retreat and run away, but they won't be able to escape so easily. Zeke followed them. The boys realized with horror that they had to run as fast as possible. Meanwhile, the knights tried to defeat the monsters. Hans also did not lag behind and tried to stop the hooded man. He threw the man aside and asked him why it mattered. The assassin jumped back a little further. He said that this sword is not what Hans will keep. If he was so jealous, then he just needs to accept it now. Hans initially took what was ownerless, that's all. Everything has already been decided, and we need to stop arguing about who it should belong to. And the one who wears this dark robe is unfair to Estelite himself, so he needs to close his dirty eyes and get out of here. This was something new. It had been a long time since the man had such a daring rival. He asked the name of the guy who was holding Estelita. He was just curious about the name of the person who had been approved to own Estelide. For reference, his name was Imolida. Hans was angry and didn't want to say anything, but since he didn't answer, there was nothing to be done. Imolita attacked the boy with his magic, which seemed to cut across the ground like blades. The hooded man turned to the owner of Estelade again and asked how many times he had to slash him before he would say his noble name. A huge boulder appeared in front of Hans, which was supposed to stop the attack. It was Snock. He told his friend to be careful. This guy directed huge rocks that started to fall from the sky. Imolita cut each stone with ease. Snock couldn't believe how this was even possible. Hans ordered Snoke to run away from here. Imolita turned all his sharp needles with which he cut stones on Snoke. Hans barely managed to protect the boy, holding back the blow with his holy sword. As these threads rubbed against the sharp blade of the sword, they began to crack. Soon they finally broke and fell apart like ribbons. Imolita didn't like that these two were able to cope. There was a big explosion. Hans asked his friend if he was okay, and he replied that the guy had saved him. Snock asked what was hanging from the sword. It resembled some kind of threads. Hans asked what it was made of since his hands were still buzzing. It was thread, but Snock, looking closer, could tell it was no ordinary thread. It is called the Death of Swords. It extracts alloys of various metals. It is thin, therefore smooth, hard and sharp. Imolita, smiling, held in his hand a large number of such threads. Suddenly, Estelade was completely enveloped by them. Hans, gritting his teeth, tried to break these threads and get his sword. Eventually, he succeeded, and the threads loosened. Hans shouted at Snoke to cover him, and the boy rushed to attack. Many sharp stones flew towards Imolita. Just like last time, the hooded man cut them. Hans tried to cut the threads, but they were so strong that he had to give it his all. Suddenly, he heard someone crying for help. The knight flew away from the powerful explosion, and the girl, an ordinary Christian, ran from the monster who was trying to grab her. He succeeded. He squeezed the innocent girl into his fist. Hans told Snoke to help those people first. Hans will definitely come up with something, but now Snoke needs to help the ordinary people at all costs. The guy accepted the order and rushed to help. Now the forces of Imolita have become much stronger. The threads surrounding Estelita were filled with magic. This was followed by an extremely huge explosion. This threw Hans to the side, but he still did not let go of the holy sword. This blow was too strong and painful. Turning back, Hans saw two guys. These were the people who fought with them in the bar, who mocked him and Snoke's dream of becoming heroes. They were so brave then, and now there's nothing left of that. Due to his inattention, Hans allowed Imolita to sneak up closer. The man struck with his threads, trying to at least touch these guys. Two guys covered their eyes with their hands so as not to see all this horror. It is very difficult for Hans to hold off the attacks alone. Suddenly, several threads wrapped around his hand. They squeezed the skin so hard that blood came out. Hans shouted to the guys behind them to stop standing and run faster. The two immediately rushed to run through the fire. Imolita, seeing tears in the guy's eyes, thought that these were people important to him. Hans replied that they were splinters that wanted to fight him. The man was surprised that even so the guy wanted to save them, even after receiving a wound. But Hans had no sin of murder. Now it became clear why Estelita chose him. But that's why he can't keep it. It's different from the owner. Was it true that the one who picked it up was the owner? And the person who picked up the deceased's things will also be their owner. Hans's business was going badly, and he no longer had the strength to move. Was he really going to die like this? Suddenly he noticed something, and hope appeared in his mind. Someone freed his hand from the sharp threads. Imolita stood in shock because he did not expect this. Another explosion occurred, but it was different from the previous ones. It was so strong that it blew everyone away. Aura headed towards the hooded man. She even made Imolita fly away. Hans's eyes lit up. In front of him he saw the mighty Sir Zeke. A large number of monsters were defeated. Hans was very happy to see Sir Zeke back. Zeke asked the guy why he was holding the holy sword in his hands. He replied that he was just trying to get it, and it came out. Layla asked if it wasn't a sword that could distinguish the owner, and asked how the two of them were able to get it. Zeke said that this sacred sword was a little out of his taste, so anyway, it means that Hans has grown up since Estelade chose him. Sir Zeke congratulated the boy because he was one step closer to becoming a hero since he was holding the holy sword. Hans, a little embarrassed, thanked for the congratulations. Of course, the sword's ability to choose its owner is impaired. While they were talking, a monster came up to them and hit the ground with all its might. Behind this brute stood Imolita. He was very serious and determined. At first glance, it seemed like he had attacked them all. But the target was clearly Layla. Zeke asked Hans if this guy was the boss, and he replied that this hooded man was stronger than the cloaks they met in the ruins. Zeke turned to Imolita and asked what his goal was. The man replied that he longed for death. The huge monsters were advancing in ever greater numbers. There were too many of them, and they all wanted to get the girl. She wanted to attack them with one powerful move. Zeke, using the power of the new sword, cut them down with one swing. Only the limbs of the monsters fell to the floor. Now was the most important and decisive moment. Zeke saw that the threads were wrapped around his sword. Soon the guy himself found himself completely covered in them. Layla screamed at Zeke, very worried about him. The threads squeezed the boy's body even tighter. Imolida understood that this was the end, and that victory was his. The man wanted to tighten the strings so tightly, but he couldn't do anything. And Zeke stood there emotionlessly. Imolida didn't understand why they weren't working. Dark energy gathered in Zeke's fist. Anger and irritation were visible on the man's face. Did he really think he had won? The threads that held Zeke's body loosened. But the man did not lose hope and released new ones. The guy grabbed them with one hand. Apparently, the man thought that Zeke was moving only with the power of this sword. Zeke tore the new threads apart with one movement and then struck, the wave of which spread for several meters. All the debris was flying towards Imolida, and he tried to somehow protect himself. When the dust cleared, a boy's grin appeared behind it. Zeke got pretty close to the man. He grabbed him by the throat and lifted him up. So when Zeke let go of the sword, Imolida thought he had won for good. He was not entirely wrong, but he misjudged the sword's influence. It's simple. He just gave him the opportunity to fully use his magical power. But even if the sword is gone, Zeke's power will not be lost. Zeke asked with a smile if a little hope was sweet. The guy squeezed the man's throat so hard that the veins on his face popped out. In the morning, the destroyed city could be seen. The builders were hauling logs, trying to repair something. Zeke's sword was lying on the table, and he wondered what it was. There's something unusual about it. It wasn't with Zeke for very long, but he thinks he was asleep, and his power awakened the sword. If Zeke keeps using it, maybe he'll figure something out. Suddenly he felt something. Zeke looked at the door and said that we could come in. It was Layla. She asked how the guy knew there was someone behind the door since she hadn't even knocked. Zeke replied that even if the mage wasn't visible, they should leave the sword and prepare the ground. The girl didn't quite understand what this had to do with it and sat down at the table. The guy asked why she came. Earlier, he wanted to know what she knew. But haven't they finished this conversation already? But Layla wanted to tell him. But she had only one condition. There is practically no living space left from the beautiful tourist town. The builders tried their best to somehow fill the holes in the roofs of the houses. Two men watched them, and one said that the builders were talking about continuing the restoration, but he did not know whether the damaged area would be restored to its original appearance. And who will come to see the sights in a city that has been attacked by monsters? One guy suggested that maybe a good idea would be to engage people with a story. The horrors that beset the city were terrible. But weren't there heroes who helped them get rid of these monsters? They would make stories out of the heroes' actions and spread them around. Why doesn't the mayor make a statue and put it in the center of town? The man said it was a good idea. They can glorify those who helped them throughout the world and thus be able to repay the heroes. Another guy asked why he didn't come up with nicknames for the characters so that tourists could easily recognize them. This idea was also great. For example, the one who used the power of the earth, Snoke, could be given the name Earth Warrior. Layla, who used magic so skillfully, will be called the Warrior of Magic. To Hans, the one who cut with the shining sword, they will give him the title Warrior of the Sun. In tribute to the overwhelming strength of the one called Zeke, one could call him the Warrior of Strength. Zeke said that setting conditions is a bad habit. Layla pointed to the sword and asked if he was going to keep using it, and the boy replied that he might. He's not exactly sure yet, but he thinks that he'll still have all his magic for a while. For example, like Estelady or Tornium, the sword itself seems to give power to the one who uses it. The girl asked which of the three swords was the strongest, because he had tried all three. Zeke replied that this one gives even more power. But then there is no point in using Tornium. Layla had one condition, to use this sword well and not even look in the direction of Tornium. Zeke said that as soon as he saw this sword, Tornium didn't even think about picking it up. In this case, the guy thought about what question to ask her. First of all, the question of who she was too abstract. Layla would have answered that she had an unstable memory if he had asked that question. Zeke asked. Since when she had vague memories, the girl said that when she woke up she was already running away. She had no thoughts about herself, or about those who were chasing her, or why they were chasing her, only along with the desire that they never catch her. The girl had only vague memories of the future. That's why she hid in the ruins. Layla didn't expect that these people would find her there either. I didn't think they would plunge the city into such chaos just to find her alone. The guy handed her a handkerchief. He had already said earlier that it was not her fault. The girl was a little embarrassed and took the handkerchief in her hands. She didn't expect the guy to be able to comfort her. In any case, he's a bad guy who's committed to living a good life. Layla laughed a little. She didn't understand what he meant. The next question was why she was in Osporin. Layla came to check if her memories were true. Among their characters, the closest in territory was the vampire. If by vampire she meant Joachim, then she was wrong. The girl asked what he was talking about. Now he doesn't go by the name vampire. He is now a count named Joachim Dracula. The girl asked if it was he who changed the future. Zeke replied that it was. So now that Zeke has given the core to Joachim, he won't become that vampire? Layla asked why Zeke did it. Since he promised to live a good life, then if he becomes bad, he will have to kill him. Zeke didn't want to do this to someone he was close to. Layla asked if the boy really wouldn't become Zeke more. Zeke didn't have the slightest desire because he had made a promise to live well. The girl suddenly remembered what the guy had done by killing Imolida. But killing a villain was also a good thing. Layla asked if he was interested in anything else, but it seems he has already asked everything he wanted. Suddenly he remembered the name Bravey. When they were on a date and sitting at a bar, the girl said that if the guy was going to change his last name, she thought Bravey sounded good. Zeke didn't understand what kind of name that was at all. There was silence in the room for a second. Zeke the Brave is his name as a warrior from the future. Zeke couldn't believe he would be a warrior. The girl didn't really believe it either. Her memory is not accurate. So she doesn't know how he became a warrior and what kind of life he led after. But Zeke the Brave was definitely a time period in which the guy became a warrior. Now Zeke understood what it meant. He believed that brave should never be used again. Layla didn't care at all. Zeke asked if he had used Estelidi then, but the girl did not remember. The guy thought about how he wasn't brave now, but how could he have gotten Estelid back then? He asked if this could be the reason. The girl didn't understand what he meant. Snock entered the room and said that it was time for them to leave. Zeke said that Hans was just in time. The boy asked to give him the sacred sword. Hans was already starting to worry that he would be taken away from him, but Zeke just wanted to check something. Layla asked what he wanted to check. He wanted to see if he could get Estelid for the fate warping key. It's all speculation to some extent, but either way, the fate warping key is clearly connected to Estelid. He doesn't have the fate warping key in his fingers right now, so maybe if there is a connection between them, Estelid just won't listen to Zeke. Hans handed Sir Zeke the sacred sword. Everyone was watching what was about to happen. Estelide felt at ease in Zeke's arms. Everyone said that the sword obeyed. Layla thought that they were just fools. Zeke gave the weapon back to Hans and said that the sword was his now, so he needed to take good care of it. Now it was time for them to move on. Zeke turned to the girl and addressed her. Zeke had a proposal for her. In the evening, Hans and Snock slept soundly by the fire. Zeke and Layla sat and watched the fire burn. Turning to the guys, Zeke thought that these two were very tired. This was understandable because the road here was quite difficult and along the way the guys fought monsters. But this is all part of their training. Zeke sat up and said that then he would go to bed early too. Layla asked him to wait and asked when he would tell her about his proposal. Zeke asked if he could tell them tomorrow, since they still had a lot of time. After all, the girl is also tired from the road, and first she needs to sleep. Zeke looked at her and turned to Layla. He asked why she looked at him like that when they first met. She didn't know either. It was just that was the atmosphere then. Zeke thought she would answer like that. And then they suddenly had a fight. Then Zeke suspected her. Layla didn't think that she had become suspicious because he was the one who would become a demon lord in the future, but he wasn't one now. If the girl wanted to ask him something, now was the time. Zeke was about to answer before he fell asleep. The girl suspected what he wanted to offer her. Turning back, she saw that Zeke was already asleep. She was very touched that the guy fell asleep quickly. The guy opened his eyes because someone was calling him. In front of him, he saw a girl who asked if he had slept well. He asked Ain the same thing. There was a man sitting next to the fire who saw Zeke wake up. Someone shouted that this was why elves were not suitable for such work. An elderly man shouted at a girl that he had more physical strength than she did. The girl simply nodded and made fun of the magician because he was much weaker than her. The man told Zeke that if he was fully awake, it would be good if he stopped these two. Zeke approached them and said that they needed to get ready for breakfast and go, because today they were responsible. Ain told the boy that he works hard every morning, but he is already used to it, so it is not difficult. The girl said that the guy is great at managing a team with such strong characters. A guarantee from Saint Karuna, Ein Primel Lubella. Zeke was confident in his abilities even without it. If his guarantee gives them confidence, he will repeat it to them as long as he wants. Suddenly, Zeke woke up with fear. Layla had already gone to bed at this time. Hans and Snock were also sleeping. Zeke didn't understand what all this was. Is it possible that this dream is because of the new sword?